Chapter 1353. The Crimson Wings was a newly established large city with a population of 2 million. In a magic world where transportation and resources were not plentiful, this was a rare and precious number. The Magus world defined a city as a small city with a population of 10 to 20,000, a medium city with 20 to 50,000, a large city with 50 to 90,000, and a large city with more than 90,000. There was a deep reason for such a standard, and that was the restriction of transportation, food, and water. In a higher plane like the Magus world, Magi could fly in the sky and dig into the ground. They could overturn rivers and seas with a wave of their hands and move mountains. However, in the lower levels of society, in the mortal world, they still followed the more primitive ways of life of farming, hunting, and herding livestock. The lives of Magi and mortals were like heaven and earth. The difference was so huge that it was hard to imagine. Magi would rather spend a large amount of resources to breed some sweet-tasting fruits and vegetables than spend the slightest bit of effort to help mortals improve the production of rice and grains. This also meant that a large amount of farmland and grains produced were not enough to feed too many people. Ordinary farmers ate simple meals and worked for an entire year just to fill their stomachs. If they wanted to eat meat and have a feast, other than raising livestock, they could only take the risk and go hunting in the forest. Thus, the lack of grain production meant that it was impossible to have a large population within a region. Otherwise, just the problem of food alone would be enough to give the ruler a headache. If the local grain was insufficient, could they import from the outside world? This had to be mentioned about the terrible roads and transportation in the Magus world. Most of the roads in the Magus world were simple and crude dirt roads. They were ordinary dirt roads that were trampled by many travelers and merchant groups. These roads were impassable during rainy days. Even if the weather was good, the potholes and rocks that could be seen everywhere could turn a journey into a disaster. Most of the goods here were transported by carts, wooden carriages that were pulled by special wildebeest horses. Its characteristics were that it could only carry a small amount of goods, and it was fragile and slow. With this kind of road and this kind of transportation method, it was possible to transport some goods over short distances. To continuously import food, water, firewood, and other basic daily necessities from hundreds of miles away was simply a joke. It was this series of backward and primitive factors that prevented the emergence of large cities. Even the famous tier 4 main cities in the central part of the continent only had 110,000 to 20,000 residents. It wasn't that they couldn't gather more people, but they really couldn't afford the resources disaster caused by such a huge population. In comparison, the Crimson Wing had gathered a population of around 2 million. The meaning behind this made many of the top-ranked Magi who had come from afar feel puzzled. Could it be that the Crimson family had so many resources that they could benefit ordinary citizens? However, wasn't it a huge waste to waste resources on these lowly and despicable mortals? One had to know that these mortals did not have the slightest bit of talent to become a sorcerer. Their only value was probably to enrich their territory, and the other was to work hard to produce a certain proportion of sorcerer apprentices with their huge numbers. Only those sorcerer apprentices were worth nurturing and worthy of the sorcerer families pouring resources into them. In the eyes of many Magi, mortals without any talent were like horses and mules. They were merely tools to maintain the population. Therefore, they had never bothered to spend their time and energy on these useless people, let alone helping them solve their problems and improve their lives. However, this huge mega city, the Crimson Wings, was obviously different. This was a strange city that had integrated sorcery into its society and daily life. The streets were neat and tidy, and the roads were made of hardened stones. Rows upon rows of businesses and shops, and the same style of living, business, and entertainment areas. On the streets, other than the pedestrians rubbing shoulders with each other, the most surprising thing was the many cargo magic machines and metal sports cars. The Crimson Wings had already abandoned the slow and inefficient horse carriages and instead used the metal magic machines that were powered by magic batteries as the main means of transportation. The things that sped along the roads were no longer slow horse-drawn carriages, but strange magic machines that were made of metal. Small amounts of goods relied on land magic machines to transport them, while the truly large amounts of goods relied on the strange goblin airships. After changing to being powered by magic energy, these goblin airships no longer had the horrifying sight of steam filling the air, nor did they have the loud noise of the propellers. They silently shuttled back and forth in the sky, following a special flight path. It gave off the vibe of a flourishing magic machine civilization. Ever since the Crimson family obtained the stable Kairas alloy from Molten City, they had never stopped building the magic furnace. This way, magic energy was no longer a problem for the Crimson family. Many goblin shops were opened in the Crimson Wing City, and they openly sold non-armed magic machines to the public. They also provided free magic batteries to recharge. This action undoubtedly provided the greatest convenience for the promotion of magic machinery. A land magic machine that could run for hundreds of miles without rest was even more cost-effective than keeping an entire caravan. Therefore, in the entire Crimson Wing City, ancient and primitive caravans could no longer be seen. What replaced them were land magic machines that were as fast as lightning and as fast as flying. However, for the safety of the pedestrians, all land magic machines that entered the Crimson Wing City could only run at the lowest speed possible, and they had to travel on special petrified roads. The widespread promotion and use of magic machines, as well as the blossoming of the magic civilization, allowed the Crimson Wings to give birth to many strange professions that did not exist in the outside world. There were magic machine technicians, magic machine mechanics, airship pilots, magic seed researchers, cleaners, city enforcers. It had to be said that this was a new world that was completely different from the other Magus cities in the Magus world. The energy and vitality it contained was something that even Monash Gaia could not understand. Even a top-notch sorcerer like Gaia could not understand, see through, or see clearly. Does that Grim have nothing better to do than to come up with these new things? Monash asked. Gaia let down the curtain, his face full of disbelief. What's the use of taking care of these humans so well? When the enemies come, they can't do anything. They're not even as good as apprentices who can throw fireballs. You don't have to care about that. Alfred, the Lord of Molten City, smiled and stroked his mustache. Just tell me, are the residents of this city happy? He asked in a low voice. What's the use of being happy? What can we get from wasting resources and energy on them? Do you think they can help us conquer a secondary plane? Monash asked. Monash Gaia was obviously a staunch supporter of the supremacy of bloodlines and magi. He was not interested in these fancy things in front of him. With their weak bodies, I'm afraid half of them will die the moment they reach the other plane before the enemies come and kill them. The Lord of Molten shook his head and laughed, not arguing with him. Instead, he changed the topic. You've seen the changes in the Crimson Wings. Haven't you noticed that it's different from other Magus cities? Are you talking about magic energy? That's right. You should have felt it too. This city is filled with magic energy. It's almost like a flourishing city that's supported by magic energy. Aren't you curious about where their magic energy comes from? Don't tell me it's from the Magus Towers. They can't support such a huge demand. You mean the Crimson family has an endless source of energy? What is it? A treasure, some kind of spell formation, or some special method from another world? I've already looked into it. It's a special device called the Magic Furnace. It can continuously extract violent magic energy from the void world and tame it. Isn't that the same as the elemental altar? It's not the same. At least the elemental altar needs to be built at a fixed node, and the cost to build it is shocking. However, the magic furnace they built can be moved at will, and it can be installed on any magic equipment. Alfred squinted his eyes and spoke with great emotion. No wonder the Crimson family can use metal magic equipment on a large scale. It's all because of this endless magic energy. Any civilization or force that wants to grow strong needs energy and resources. They don't lack energy. And as long as they continue to expand outwards and seize the necessary resources from other planes, it's not difficult to build a huge force. Monash Gaia also sighed sadly. No wonder Grimm can get stronger and stronger the more he fights. So this is the real reason why they are so strong. Don't think too much. This time, Grimm must have gathered us here to discuss how to deal with the demon wave that was about to arrive. Clara and I are very clear on our stance. We'll follow your lead, brother. If Grimty's request is not too excessive, we will reluctantly agree to it. If he's too harsh, I hope you can fight for what's right and not let him do whatever he wants. Hearing this, Monash Gaia, the leader of the Golden Clan, smiled faintly. A faint smile appeared on Gaia's face, and he said indifferently, "Is this the attitude of you and Clara and Ariza and Roderick? Among all the wizards in the Central Continent, you're the only one who can compete with Grimm. So you're going to push me out and roast me on a fire?" Monash Gaia smiled mockingly. "We're not going against Grimm. We're just fighting for what's right." Alfred could not help but laugh awkwardly. Power represented status. Chapter 1354. The demonic wave is coming. Grimm said calmly. Everyone in the meeting was speechless. None of the people who could sit in this spacious sorcerer hall were good people. 15 Tier 4 sorcerers sat around a long obsidian conference table, representing almost all the major organizations in the Central Continent. Behind each of them stood 2 or 3 juniors or trusted subordinates of their respective clans. Grimm Crimson Mary Crimson Monash, Gaia Golden Clan Claridonel, Family Alfred Moulton City Declan Fabrice, Family Rowan Amuto, Academy Nicholas and Tome, Family Matthew Bain, Family Andrews Arden, Family Ashton, Family Smiley, Family Arisa, Family Munzo, Family Adria, Family Claire, Family Murray, Family Kunis, Family Roderick, Family Hill, Family, the Grade 4 Lightning Lord, Arms, was lying on the huge stone plaza in front of the Magus Hall, his azure dragon scales glistening under the warm sunlight. With him here, no one would be able to enter the hall and pry into the secrets inside. In the sky above the city, 2 silver-white giant airships floated quietly, surrounded by dense black dots. In the distant horizon, 3 towering wizard towers stood tall and majestic, their surroundings overflowing with dazzling brilliance. As this was the first high-level meeting in the Central Continent, the entire Crimson Wing was on high alert. However, considering that all the Grade 4 Magi in the Central Continent were gathered here, those who dared to cause trouble at this moment were probably not even born yet. In this hall, only Grade 4 sorcerers had the right to sit. Their relatives and subordinates could only stand behind them and listen to them. Without the permission of a Grade 4 Magus, these outsiders had no right to speak, let alone make any decisions. Magi never had the complicated etiquette and rules of the human nobles, so as soon as the meeting began, Grimm went straight to the point and pointed out the main topic of today's meeting. Most of the attendants and Tier 3 wizards present might not know what the term Manatide represented, but all the Tier 4 wizards knew exactly what it meant. According to records, the demon tide would erupt in the multiverse once every 10,000 years. An extremely powerful demon tide would gush out from the depths of the ocean of mana. Its impact would affect all material planes, the elemental realm, and the abyss realm. The appearance of the mana tide was both good and bad for the dimensional civilization. The advantage was that as the mana tide surged, all power systems that used magic energy as their foundation would become more powerful. The downside was that the mana tide would scour the material plane, which would make most of the dimensional world's spatial barriers less safe. In particular, when the mana tide appeared, the astral beasts that roamed the depths of the endless sea of stars all year round would come out of their nests and take the initiative to run to various material planes to devour flesh and souls. Moreover, under the influence of the mana tide, the magical creatures in the sorcerer world would also become abnormally active. It was very likely that they would not be able to control their bloodthirsty nature and rush out of the Black Forest to attack human cities and settlements. Hence, under the attack of both internal and external threats, every person in power had to be careful in dealing with the possible dangers that might arise. Everyone in the meeting exchanged glances and discussed in private. Finally, the bloodline Magus Andrews, who was dressed in white leather armor, could not help but speak. Has the information been confirmed? From his expression, it seemed like he knew nothing about the demon tide. Although everyone present was a grade 4 Magus, their individual abilities and innate talents were different. Their specialties were also not the same. Hence, Andrews, who lacked a powerful prophet in his family, obviously did not have a good grasp of the current situation. It has been confirmed. It's absolutely true, Grimm said in a deep voice. Andrews sucked in a breath of cold air once more. The interval of 10,000 years was too long. It was long enough for most of the creatures in the plains to forget about the terror of the demon tide. Even grade 4 magi had a basic lifespan of around 1,000 years. Most of the time, as long as their luck was not too bad, they would be able to live their entire lives without encountering the legendary demon tide. It was obvious that the magi present today were not very lucky. How much time do we have? This time, it was Declan who asked. About 10 years. Grimm sighed. In 10 years, the first demon tide will affect the Magus world. When that time comes, although Grimm didn't finish his sentence, the meaning behind his words resonated with everyone. These people were already standing at the peak of the world. Even the strongest demon tide could not threaten their lives. However, it did not mean that their subordinates were not. Their subordinates were not afraid, but it did not mean that their subsidiary territories and secondary planes were not afraid. Once the demon tide swept through, the plane's barrier would be riddled with holes. All sorts of astral beasts and otherworldly creatures could enter the plane and eat to their heart's content. Before they were chased out, the entire territory would be in a mess, and some secondary planes might even break out of control. Hence, in addition to guarding the safety of the territories in the Magus world, the Magus families also had to maintain order in the secondary planes. In this way, the military strength of each Magus family was stretched to the limit, and they were in dire straits. 10 years. Yeah, why is it so short? We only have 10 years to prepare. Most of the sorcerers looked anxious and troubled. Perhaps after this wave of mana tide passed, everyone's wallets would shrink by a lot. Of course, not all magi were so cautious. For example, Lord Alfred had a calm expression on his face, as if he did not care at all. His molten city was located at the center of the central continent. It was not bordered by the dark forest, and there were no large spatial rifts nearby. Hence, he was much more relaxed, and he even had the time to worry about other things. Lord Grimm, since you've gathered us here, could it be that you've made some arrangements? Grimm said indifferently. The central continent used to be a pile of loose sand. No matter what we did, we could not unite and form a force. Hence, I feel that there is a need to unify everyone's strength and form a suitable defense. What do you all think? Although he said he was asking for everyone's opinion, the two Crimson Giants, Grimm and Mary, were sitting at one end of the conference table. Their mysterious and violent powers were gathered together, causing everyone in the conference to feel a mountain-like pressure. All the Magi looked at each other, and finally, they could not help but look at the first person on the left side of the conference table, the patriarch of the Golden Clan, Monash, Gaia's body. Even Grimm and Mary were attracted by Gaia's aura and slowly fixed their eyes on him. Being stared at by so many powerful gazes, even Monash couldn't do anything. Gaia's strength was astonishing, but he was also starting to panic. This was Grimm's first Scarlet Conference, and if he appeared to be too forceful, it would undoubtedly bring disaster to the Golden Tribe. However, as the only Tier 4 sorcerer in the Central Continent capable of restraining Grimm, he could not retreat behind the others. So, Monash? Gaia frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "That doesn't seem appropriate. Our Golden Clan's bloodline is thin, and the number of awakened members is few. If a portion of us are transferred away, let alone those few secondary planes, I'm afraid we won't even be able to protect our family's territory." Facing this thorn that had suddenly appeared, Mary's brows furrowed, and the smile on her face gradually disappeared. In the past, she might not have dared to provoke this terrifying golden titan, but now that she had the support of Nightmare Castle, she was not afraid of him at all. Although she was injured and the Nightmare Castle was in a mess, Monash was clearly not at his peak either. If they really fought, it was still unknown who would win and who would lose. Fortunately, although Mary was furious, she knew that today's matter was too important. She could not easily mess it up. Hence, she suppressed her anger and coldly scanned the conference hall with her blood-red eyes. All the Tier 4 magi who met her gaze could not help but feel their hearts tremble, and they took the initiative to look away. It was said that Lady Mary had been heavily injured in the Battle of Laws, but it seemed that her dignified demeanor was not affected much. This caused a few of the magi who were secretly surging with emotions to frown, and they could not help but reconsider their own plans and plans. "You seem to be thinking too much." Grimm had long since predicted their reactions, and once again smiled calmly. "What I'm talking about is not transferring forces from your families to replenish the Crimson Magi. Instead, according to the region and the degree of the impact of the demon wave, the families that have spare forces will transfer a portion of their forces to support the Magus families that have suffered the most." At this point, Grimm raised his hand, and mana surged in the Magus Hall. A three-dimensional map of the central continent was projected on the table. "Everyone, please take a look. There are a total of 31 regions in the central continent, and 7 of them are in the outer regions that are directly connected to the Black Forest. The Alobes region that the Crimson family occupies will naturally be guarded by us, and we do not need your support. As for the other families, it involves Myra's Kunis family, Ariza's Manso family, Roderick's Hill family. There are also 3 regions that are jointly managed by a few middle-ranked Magus families. I think that these 3 families will have to stabilize the secondary plane, guard against the invasion of other planes, and guard against the Black Forest monsters. They will definitely not have enough troops. Hence, the Crimson family is willing to provide 2,000 magic troops to assist them in defending against the invasion of the demon wave. As for the few of you families that are temporarily free from the threat of the Black Forest, it is not too much to take an appropriate portion of your family's forces. I can guarantee that these forces will not be used in the Crimson battlefield, and will only be invested in the Magus families that need them." After hearing all this, the hall instantly fell silent. Chapter 1355. Every large family that is close to the Black Forest send out people and magi to clear out the magic creatures in their respective areas. Set a limit of 1,000 miles. Wild magic creatures of rank 2 and above must not remain within 1,000 miles of the Black Forest. Also, set up mobile sentries in the necessary areas to monitor any changes in the Black Forest at all times. The Bracada and Dagon regions are in the south. There are no rank 4 organizations guarding them, and they're all managed by the local small to medium Magus families. With such strength, it's more than enough to defend, but it's too difficult to advance. Inform them to immediately form an alliance to clear out the nearby Black Forest. As for the lack of high-grade combat power, Wizard Matthew, your Bane family is the closest to the Bracada area. You and the local allied forces will be stationed in the Black Forest. The Bane family can choose not to participate in normal encirclement activities, but you will be responsible for killing the high-grade monsters that are too strong. Is that okay?" Matthew, who had always been quiet, pondered for a while after hearing Grimm's question. After confirming that this assignment would not have any negative impact on him and his family, he nodded in agreement. "Yes, everything will be done according to Lord Grimm's instructions." "All right." Grimm's expression was calm as he continued to assign tasks. The Dagon region is a little more complicated. There are problems with the Black Forest and the underground world. Magus Merva, your Animdor Academy is not far from the Dagon region. How about you be in charge of defending there? At this moment, Merva's spirit and vigor had long been destroyed by the series of unforeseen events. He actually looked like a doddering old man. Just from his appearance, it was obvious that he had reached the end of his life. His spiritual force and physical body were showing signs of withering. "Yes, I'll immediately contact the families in the Dagon region after I return." "All right, After assigning tasks to the south, Grimm turned his attention to the few Magus families in the north. Magus Mira, Magus Ariza, and Magus Roderick. Your family's territories are all adjacent to the Black Forest. Will you be able to handle the demon wave independently? Hearing this question, the three magi looked at each other. In the end, it was Ariza, who was dressed like a barbarian, who spoke first. There might be some problems with my Mancer family? Oh, let's hear it. Ariza, who possessed the bloodline of the ancient war ape, hesitated for a moment. He looked around, clenched his teeth a few times, and finally revealed his secret. Our Manso family has 3 secondary planes in our hands. 2 of the smaller planes have already been thoroughly developed, so there shouldn't be any problems in terms of safety. That's the only mid-tier plane. We can barely establish a foothold there. We can't even talk about further dimensional development. Once the demon wave erupts, most dimensional teleportation will be affected. I'm worried that the enemy will take the opportunity to destroy the last forward base there. If we, the Manso family, increase our military strength and dispatch most of our magi there, I'm afraid that the Dark Forest will not be able to handle it. Every family's resources and the situation of the demiplane were top secrets. Unless it was an imminent crisis, they wouldn't be willing to take it out and expose it. It had been more than 700 years since Ariza reached Tier 4, and he had 3 demiplane coordinates in his possession. Even though Grimm's Crimson family was so domineering, they only had 4 secondary planes. However, of these 4, the Goblin plane and Heisen plane had already been thoroughly developed, while the Lance plane was still being slowly colonized. The remaining mountain plane had already discovered large amounts of precious ores, but it was a pity that the plane's environment was too vile and the progress of development was very slow. After exterminating Frid's Yomo family, they had also taken over the 5 demiplane coordinates. However, with the change in ruler, the order of the plane had fallen into chaos. It would take at least a few decades for them to smooth things out and continuously plunder resources and slaves from the plane. Since Ariza had taken the lead, Magus Mira, who was dressed in red, spoke up as well. I have some problems on my side as well. I have 4 demiplanes, and 2 of them aren't very stable. Under these circumstances, there shouldn't be any problems in clearing out the Dark Forest. However, if we discover high-ranked magical beasts, it'll be very difficult to mobilize enough forces to encircle them. Grimm nodded, and his gaze fell on the last Magus, Roderick. This was a handsome man dressed in noble attire. He had delicate features and thick eyeliner, giving off a strange feeling that it was difficult to distinguish his gender. I have no problems there. I can defend both the demiplane and the Dark Forest. There won't be any problems. Grimm nodded in satisfaction and spoke again. Since Magus Ariza and Magus Mira are a little nervous, our Crimson family can send some magic troops to support them. That mobility troop of 2,000 will be sent to the Ariza family's territory to clear out the magical beasts. In addition, our Crimson family can also send 2 grade 3 magi to support Magus Mira. This way, there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Hearing this, Ariza and Mira hurriedly placed their hands on their chests and thanked him. The matter of the Dark Forest has been settled. Next, it's time to talk about the spatial cracks. Grimm's gaze swept across everyone, and he spoke in a deep voice. The moment the magic tide reaches the Magus world, all the gaps and cracks in the plains will naturally open. It will no longer be able to stop the nether storms and otherworld monsters from entering. Therefore, every Magus family must carefully and comprehensively screen out the weak points in their territories and try to make up for them. As for those naturally formed, large, spatial rifts, at this point, all the Magi, including Grimm, looked at Andrews with sympathy. The most famous spatial crack in the central part of the continent was located in the territory of the Arden family, where Andrews belonged. It was a 1,000-meter-long spatial crack. If it opened on its own, the Arden family would be in big trouble. In the past thousands of years, the spatial crack had not only not been a disaster, but it had also become a huge source of wealth for the Arden family. The spatial crack was one of the few weak points in the Magus world, and the energy required to cross the plane barrier, there was 1/10 of that in other places. Therefore, the Arden family had built many portals at the edge of the spatial crack that led to other well-known areas, and they had wantonly carried out cross-plane trade. It could be said that at least one out of every two otherworld slaves in the central part of the continent had entered the Magus world through the spatial crack. However, in the face of the demon wave, the spatial crack had suddenly become a noose around the neck of the Arden family. Considering how weak the space there was, not to mention small monsters, even the most powerful star beasts could force their way in. Star beasts were the natural enemies of all plane creatures. They had been living in the depths of a sea of stars for many years, constantly being eroded by the ocean of magic power. Therefore, they were almost immune to ordinary elemental sorcery. Elemental sorcerers would not be able to harm them unless they could affect the laws of nature. Moreover, their own power system was completely different from that of plane creatures, which was why the so-called magic resistance that wizards were so proud of had no effect on their attacks. The direct result of this was that a rank 4-star beast could easily take down 4 or 5 human magi of the same rank. If a group of star beasts came out of the spatial crack when the demon wave broke out, the entire Arden family would be in danger of being wiped out. Don't look at me. If the demon wave comes, the Arden family will never be able to defend the big spatial crack. By that time, the star beast will not only ravage my territory, but the whole central part will also be affected, Andrews warned with a fierce look on his face. Why didn't you think of us when you were enjoying the benefits of the big spatial crack alone? Now you want to drag us down with you? Wizard Declan could not help but let out a muffled snort. Yeah, the Arden family has made a lot of profits from the big spatial crack. It's time to strengthen the seal there. This time, it was Ashton from the Smiley family who spoke. His territory was only separated from the Arden family's territory by a small area. If the star beasts invaded, they would also be affected. It was no wonder that he was so displeased and resentful. Don't worry, the Arden family will not back down. When I get back from this meeting, I will arrange for the sealing of the big spatial crack. I will try my best to build more war wizard pagodas in the next 10 years, and surround the space crack so tightly that not even a drop of water can trickle through. Andrews clenched his teeth and promised all of this, then suddenly changed the topic. But this way, our family's battle power will obviously be insufficient, and I'm afraid that we will need everyone's help to fill up the war wizard pagodas that have been built. Everyone's expression changed. It was obvious that Andrews wanted them to send their own wizards to fight for the Arden family. The atmosphere in the meeting suddenly became cold and stiff. There were too many areas in the central part of the continent, and there were too many wizard families. Each family had their own interests and needs. How difficult and helpless would it be to truly unite them all together? At this point, if Grimm still didn't show up, the situation today would definitely end on a sour note. In the end, they would return to their old ways of doing things on their own. Grimm coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention. He then slowly opened his mouth. Andrews, that is your family's territory. You have to take most of the responsibility. Andrews' face darkened. Obviously, he knew he could not refute this point, so he could only bow his head and agree. As for the Arden family's difficulties, we will not sit idly by. Do what you can on your side first, and we will fill in the rest for you. When the demon wave breaks out, I will ask Mary to move her nightmare castle there and help you suppress the big spatial crack. Then, Grimm turned to look at Monash Gaia. Guya said solemnly, no matter what, one of us must guard the spatial rift at all times. You see. Chapter 1356. The Great Manatide was coming. What was the Great Manatide? Less than half a day after the Crimson Conference ended, this magical term had spread like a plague to every corner of the central continent. However, the news did not spread limitlessly. Its range was limited to the Magi community. The common folk and the nobles who thought themselves superior were still clueless. They lived as usual, hunted, traded, and busied themselves with the major events of their lives. Yet, they did not know that a terrible calamity was about to befall this world. The Magi sealed off all information to avoid undue panic in the mortal society. However, when the news spread like wildfire among the Magi families, many Magi who heard of it were equally bewildered. What was the Great Manatide? Where did it come from? What kind of harm would it bring to us? Why did the legendary fire magus who ruled the central continent gather all the grade 4 Magi to the Crimson Wing and spread the news? Was the Great Manatide really that terrifying? The endless questions and puzzlement left most Magi families scratching their heads. All they could do was to rush into old books and search for information about the Great Manatide from the vast collection of magic texts. Once in 10,000 years, mana explosion, dimensional rift opening, magical assault, astral beast invasion. Glaring words popped out one after another, each of them so bloody, so chilling. 10,000 years was undoubtedly too long for them. It was so long that they treated history as a myth and truth as a legend. Now, when the world showed them the true face of history in another bloody way, all the wizards were shocked and once again felt their own insignificance. Though they were nobles above all others and enjoyed the most glorious and extravagant lives, they could not even make a ripple in the long river of history of the multiverse. At best, they were just a tiny droplet that drifted along with the flow, muddle-headedly completing their own brilliant and glorious lives. Just like how summer insects cannot talk about ice, they flew over so many places and visited so many gardens and meadows, believing that they had fully understood the world. They lived freely and naturally, burning up their lives brilliantly in just a short summer. Little did they know that after leaving the scorching summer and the rustling autumn wind, there was still a snowy winter and early spring in the world of reincarnation. Those who were able to become wizards had a much longer life dimension than mortals. In their eyes, mortals were like summer insects that were unable to comprehend the truth and cruelty of the world. They understood the plane and extended their vision and perception to places beyond the plane. There, they peeped at the grander and more glorious scenes of the world. However, just when they thought that they had grasped the pulse of the world again, a sudden name dragged them back into a completely unfamiliar and unknown territory. In the eyes of mortals, they might already be as powerful as gods. But in the eyes of powerful existences of a higher level, they were weak and tiny like ants, and it was even to the extent that they weren't worth mentioning at all. With their mere few hundred years of life, they originally wouldn't have been able to touch such a cosmic-level calamity. But now, be it luck or misfortune, they were very honored to personally experience the profound and mysterious Great Manatide that could engulf the entire multiverse in 10 years. Wrinkled and yellowed ancient books were dug out from the pile of old papers, and top-secret information was dug out from the ancient books. When the detailed contents were gathered together, when the incomplete information was pieced together, what was presented in front of them was a bloody reality. The Great Manatide was terrible. It was so terrible that it had exceeded their imagination. According to the incomplete records, the last time the Sorcerer's World experienced a Great Manatide was 8,500 years ago. That meant that the current Great Manatide was brought forward by 1,500 years. The last time the Mana Sea was in turmoil, it had lasted for 100 years and over a dozen waves of Great Manatide attacks. The damage they brought to the Sorcerer's World was unimaginable as well. The population of the Central Continent was reduced by more than half, and even 30% of the sorcerers were lost. Of course, that wasn't the worst. According to ancient records, the Sorcerer Union's domain had suffered the greatest casualties. A giant space-time fissure had appeared there, and an alarming number of terrifying star beasts swarmed out of it. It was because of their rampage that the population of the Sorcerer Union's domain was reduced by 2/3, and the sorcerer's casualty rate reached an astonishing 50%. It had to be said that the Great Manatide that lasted for 100 years had deeply changed the appearance of the Sorcerer's World. It was said that the Black Ink Valley in the Sorcerer Union's domain was a terrifying scar left behind by the Association's super experts in a bloody battle with the invading star beasts. Thousands of years had passed, but the scar had not completely disappeared. From this, one could see how cruel and terrifying that battle was. The space-time fissure in the Arden family's domain in the central continent was also a scar left behind by the previous Great Mana Tide, and the Sorcerer's World had yet to completely heal it. Along with the arrival of the Great Mana Tide came the powerful voice of the Crimson Conference. Clear the dark forest. Search for the weak points in the space. Relocate most of the population to a more stable region in the dimension. Build more war wizard towers. This was a war preparation guide from the Crimson family, as well as a strategic defense plan for the entire central continent for the next 10 years. After the sorcerers of the central continent digested and absorbed the information about the Great Mana Tide, the entire central continent was immediately filled with cries of discontent. It had to be known that after every level 4 sorcerer was born, they would seize the most fertile land for themselves and their family to set up their base. Such a base would naturally be located far away from the Dark Forest, in a safe zone surrounded by other regions. Hence, many small and medium-sized sorcerer families and factions were pushed to the borders of the central continent. Without exception, they all faced the danger of being attacked by the ferocious beast tide in the Dark Forest. These small and medium-sized sorcerer families had many hunting teams that specialized in hunting those high-value magical beasts and rare beasts in the depths of the Dark Forest. At that time, not only was the Dark Forest not a threat, it was instead a treasure trove of resources that they could excavate. But once the Great Mana Tide descended, the entire situation would be reversed. The past hunters would become the prey, and the scattered magical beasts would gather together, driving the large number of beasts and birds to launch a fierce counterattack against the human bases. Without the deep foundations of the large families, it was uncertain if the small and medium-sized families could withstand the attack of the Great Mana Tide. Once a wizard's pagoda fell, it would not just mean the loss of a dozen sorcerers or hundreds of apprentices. The human towns and inhabited areas under the protection of the wizard's pagoda would also be affected, becoming food for the tens of thousands of ferocious beasts. With the brains of the sorcerers, they could quickly come up with a general conclusion based on the current situation. If the Great Mana Tide was as terrifying as described in the ancient scrolls, the sorcerer families in the central continent would welcome an unprecedented reshuffle. Most of the sorcerer families or factions that did not have the ability to protect themselves would be annihilated by the Great Mana Tide. As for the remaining sorcerer families, as long as they could survive the first few waves of the Great Mana Tide and protect their wizard's pagoda and territory from being destroyed by the Great Mana Tide, what awaited them would be a great upgrade. Everything had a beginning and an end. There were pros and cons. Even though the Great Mana Tide was terrifying and would bring about great disasters, it also brought about many indescribable benefits. The first benefit was naturally the overflow of resources from the magical beasts. Ferocious magical beasts that were hard to come by in 100 years and terrifying star beasts that were hard to come by in 1,000 years would all appear on the scene, hoping to tear enough flesh and souls from the humans to fill their stomachs. And the sorcerers that survived after defeating them would undoubtedly reap a huge amount of resources that were unimaginable in the past. With the help of resources and the stimulation of slaughter on the battlefield, the chances of a sorcerer leveling up would increase by more than a few times. From a certain point of view, this could also be seen as a meaningful guidance and feedback from the consciousness of the dimension. If one were to help the sorcerer world kill the enemies and destroy the invaders, then the consciousness of the dimension of the sorcerer world would give them formless feedback, allowing them to improve their souls in the shortest amount of time possible and evolve their lives. This was actually a matter of complementing each other, two sides of the same coin. The second benefit was that the change in the magical energy environment would stimulate the creatures of the dimension to give birth to more, stronger, and better descendants. In the words of the sorcerers, during the Great Mana Tide, the ratio of human babies born with the talent of sorcerers would increase by 10 times or even 100 times. If they were nurtured, the entire Magus community would undoubtedly welcome an explosive growth. As for the deeper benefits, Only high-ranked magi would be able to enjoy them. When the world was in chaos, it was the best time for them to fish in troubled waters. The world of gods was usually guarded like an iron bucket, and there were not many opportunities for them to infiltrate or destroy it. Now that the great Manatide had come, all the barriers between planes were riddled with holes and were no longer as secure. It was the best time for them to take revenge and plunder resources. At the very least, Grimm had the intention to go to the Farron Plain for a stroll. Due to the death of Ender, Alice had begged Grimm to help her destroy the entire Farron Plain. With Grimm's current strength, it was obvious that he could not do this. However, taking advantage of the chaos in the Farron Plain, there was no problem in finding a few old friends to reminisce about the past. This was especially so for the elven swordmaster Agassi, who had forced Grimm to flee in a sorry state and even killed Ender with his own hands. He would remember all of this. Of course, if he had the time, he could go back to the Paladin Plain to reap some harvest. More than 200 years had passed, and a new batch of paladins had probably grown up. Chapter 1357. Alovis, Stony Wilderness. Between the Fenro River and the Sidrake mountain range, there was an empty wilderness of about 20 square kilometers. For some reason, there was no towering forest, no lush green grass, and no bushes. Instead, there were strange rocks of different shapes and sizes everywhere. These grayish-green, hard rocks covered the entire wilderness. Other than that, there were no other creatures or plants. It was close to noon, and a small caravan was slowly making its way through a narrow road in the middle of the wilderness. The caravan was not big, and there were only 4 carriages. 3 of them were filled with food and miscellaneous items, while the last one belonged to Wizard Lagu. The caravan diverged onto a small road in the middle of the stony wilderness. The road was a little bumpy, and the carriages would occasionally crash into rocks that were half buried in the mud. Fortunately, the mercenaries escorting the convoy were all experts in wilderness survival. It was a piece of cake for them to repair and replace a broken wheel. Finally, the caravan stopped near a pile of rocks. The mercenary leader, Jack, carefully approached the black carriage in the middle of the caravan. He lightly knocked on the carriage and said in a low voice, "Master Lagu, we've arrived at the stony wilderness." A deep, hoarse male voice came from the carriage. "Got it. Wait here." Jack immediately retreated to the side respectfully and waited in silence. After a full quarter of an hour, Wizard Lagu, who had finished his routine meditation, lifted the curtain and came out of the carriage. He stood on the shaft of the carriage and scanned the strange, stony wilderness in front of him. He quietly sensed the density of magic in the area and drew a strange rune in the air with one hand. Then, he let it slowly dissipate into the air. In the blink of an eye, a hazy, colorful halo appeared in front of Wizard Lagu. The halo was about the size of a human head. Inside it floated various magical lights that were constantly changing, including yellow, green, cyan, red, and gold. Even without elemental vision, one could clearly see that the yellow and the halo occupied most of the area, pushing the other colors to the edge. Some elements are indeed out of balance. To be able to suppress other elements to such an extent, it seems like my family's speculation was correct. There are indeed some small dimensional cracks here. The earth element is so active. Could it be that this dimension fissure is directly connected to the earth elemental world? Wizard Lagu mumbled to himself as he checked the result of the spell. Apart from him, who was a wizard, the rest of the team were all mortals. He had hired them to take care of him. He had no choice. He was used to living a luxurious life in the wizard's pagoda, and once he left the wizard's pagoda and traveled outside, he would always feel uncomfortable and troubled. In the past, if Wizard Lagu chose to go on a journey, he would have 2 or 3 apprentices following him to better take care of him. But now that the family was short of manpower, all of the wizards and apprentices had been given a lot of tasks, rushing around all over the central continent. Therefore, he could only hire mortal mercenaries to help him solve some of the troubles of traveling. Hiding far away, All the mortal mercenaries looked at the tall and slim wizard who was silently casting spells. Their eyes were filled with admiration and awe. In the world they lived in, wizards were the true masters of the world. They, on the other hand, were just a bunch of pitiful worms struggling to survive in front of a wizard. It was precisely because they were aware of their identity and status that these human mercenaries behaved respectfully in front of Wizard Lagu. They did not even dare to breathe too loudly, afraid that their vulgarity and lowliness would disturb the wizard's spell casting. After confirming the purpose of their trip, Wizard Lagu turned to Jack, who was waiting nearby, and said in a low voice, "Let's set up a small camp here. We might have to stay here for 2 days." After saying this, Laga looked up at the sky and continued, "It's still early. Let the others be busy here. Bring a few people with you to see what's going on here." After saying this, he no longer paid any attention to the submissive leader of the mercenaries. He turned around and activated the flying spell on his belt. His body slowly floated in the wind, and he quickly flew into the distance. "Quick, quick, quick! You lazy bums! Did you hear the wizard's orders? Get off the carriage and clean up this place. If you haven't set up camp by the time I come back, don't even think about having dinner tonight." Jack, who was burly and had a face full of scars and cuts, yelled loudly. He turned around and called out the names of a few mercenaries. "Thor, Ironhead, One Eye, you 3 come with me. Remember to bring your tools. Let's go." After bringing all the tools, the 4 of them flew up on their horses and whipped their horses, galloping towards the little black dot in the sky. Wizard Lagu floated 10 meters above the ground, holding a translucent black crystal ball in his hand. Every time he flew a certain distance, he would cast a spell to check the concentration of the magic energy in the air and use this to determine the specific location of the weak point in the space. After changing directions 4 to 5 times, Wizard Lagu finally landed next to a pile of rocks. When he pointed the black crystal ball at the pile of rocks, a strange yellow light suddenly lit up in the middle of the ball. This should be the place. Wizard Lagu circled around the pile of rocks. After making sure there was no deviation, he did not do anything else. After a short while, Jack and the other 3 mercenaries rushed over on their horses. They all had tools like shovels, crowbars, axes, and chisels on their backs. Dig this pile of rocks for me." Without saying another word, they immediately started digging. In just a quarter of an hour, the 30-meter wide pile of rubble had a big hole dug out, revealing a strange dot of light the size of a soybean. The light slowly floated in the narrow hole, and from time to time, strands of yellow smoke seeped out. The smoke was quickly absorbed by the surrounding rocks. It could be seen that the color of the rocks around the light was deeper and more translucent, as if they were full of energy. It really is a super small dimensional singularity. Seeing this, Wizard Lagu chased away the mercenaries and came forward to take a closer look. After a while, he took out a piece of parchment paper and started writing. However, just as he was quietly busy, the pile of rocks that he dug out suddenly started shaking violently. Even the ground began to tremble. Why is there an earth elemental creature here? Wizard Lagu took a few steps back, speechless as he looked at a middle-sized earth elemental that rose from the ground in front of him. This was a strange, humanoid earth elemental that was 3 meters tall. Its body was made up of all kinds of broken rocks of different sizes. Between the rocks, there were yellow sand particles slowly flowing and moving. Who disturbed my sleep? I sniffed the scent of a wizard. Why, human wizard, did you break into Bakera's home? The giant earth elemental's head was a broken piece of rock, and the 2 yellow halos were its eyes. Although it did not have a mouth, it could still communicate with Lagu through the strange language of the mind. This scene in front of them had undoubtedly scared the hell out of the 4 human mercenaries. They hurriedly dropped their tools, drew their swords and axes, and stood in front of Wizard Lagu to protect him. They stood in front of the weird-looking half-stone, half-clay giant from afar. "Bakera? Your name is Bakera?" Hee. I really can't imagine that there would be an earth elemental with intelligence in such a desolate place. Looks like this place has some research value. Compared to the human mercenaries who were trembling with fear, Wizard Lagu was calm and collected. After all, this earth elemental in front of him was only a rank 1 earth elemental. It could not pose any real threat to him. Bakara, I hereby announce to you that the land you occupy belongs to the Crimson family. As the Crimson Magus, I have the power to banish you back to the elemental world. Tell me, do you want to end your own life, or are you willing to hand over your life imprint and become my slave? No, we earth elemental creatures are free. We will not accept any restrictions. Fight, Bakara will slap all of you to death. Wizard Lagu's ultimatum had obviously angered this earth elemental. It roared and swept up a thick wave of earth as it rushed towards the few people. Jack and the others could only grit their teeth and rush forward with their swords and wooden shields. Both sides were not on the same level. The earth elemental did not have any weaknesses, nor did it have any flaws such as pain. Instead, it had infinite strength. In just one move, the small round shields in the hands of the mercenaries were smashed into pieces by the stone fists. They could only dodge the sweeping stones as they circled around the earth elemental. They did not dare to get close to it. Wizard Laga knew these mercenaries would not be able to handle this earth elemental, so he took out a silver badge from his pocket and gently waved it. Immediately, a 3 meters tall metal magic machine appeared in front of him. Amidst the clanking sounds of metal, the arms of the metal magic machine were raised high, and from the pitch-black muzzle, an energy fireball as fast as a meteor was fired. Gravel flew everywhere, and the earth aura dispersed. The earth elemental that had been showing off its strength was instantly smashed into pieces by the metal magic machine. It turned into a pile of rubble and fell to the ground. Wizard Lagu, who looked extremely thin and weak, wobbled his way through the pile of rubble. After searching for a long time, he finally found a fist-sized stone that was faintly flashing with an earthy yellow glow. He sealed it up and put it in his chest. It seemed like the spatial singularity had existed for a long time. After a long time, it had actually produced a grade 1 earth elemental. Now that he had this earth elemental core, he could take it back and make a simple stone imprint. It would not be a bad idea to summon an earth elemental as a slave. If he were to sell a grade 1 stone imprint, it would cost at least 80 magic crystals. Although it was not a lot, a mosquito's leg was still meat. Chapter 1358. Night quickly fell. In the temporary camp, a bonfire was lit, and a rich aroma of meat soup slowly spread in the air above the stone wilderness. Maybe it was because of the earth elemental core in the afternoon, but Wizard Lagu was in a particularly good mood. Even his skinny, sallow face showed a rare smile. Taking the opportunity to offer him meat soup and soft bread, Jack, who had a fierce look on his face, also asked for an idea. "Sir, our little Tom has been very smart since he was young. He can learn anything in a short time. It's a pity that he hasn't found a teacher who is willing to teach him. So, every child under the age of 10 will have their innate potential tested. Don't tell me your kid doesn't have the talent to become a wizard?" "Yes, absolutely. But, according to the wizard who tested his talent, our little Tom has a hidden talent. He needs to use the awakening potion before he turns 10 to activate his talent, or else it will disappear forever." Hidden talent. Wizard Lagu could not help but secretly shake his head. In the wizard continent, every 10 years, there would be specialized wizards traveling around to search for children with the talent to become a wizard. They would then gather them and send them to the wizard tower. However, the situation in the scattered tower forest was a bit special. Every family had their own fixed territory and people. Under normal circumstances, they would not allow other wizard families to recruit apprentices in their territory. Therefore, those wizard families or organizations without private territory would lose the opportunity to get new blood. If this continued, it would be strange if the inheritance was not lost. When the family messengers traveled around the territory to find apprentices with the talent to become a wizard, it was inevitable that they would meet special individuals with a hidden talent. Their talent to become a wizard was blocked from the moment they were born. If they could not activate the hidden talent through a special method before the age of 10, the talent would completely disappear from their bloodline. Most wizard families that were not powerful enough would choose to abandon these people with a hidden talent. They would not invest any resources in them. As for the reason, it was very simple. The awakening potion to activate the hidden talent was worth 120 magic crystals, and the apprentice who had activated the talent was not much stronger than a normal apprentice. If they could not successfully become a wizard, they would lose a lot of money in this deal. Not many Magus families were willing to bet 120 magic crystals on an acolyte with unknown talent. This was the main reason why they were abandoned. Without the resources of a Magus family, ordinary mortal families would not be able to afford the huge price of 120 magic crystals. One had to know that magic crystals were the hard currency of the sorcerer world, and it was almost completely monopolized by the sorcerers. If an ordinary noble family did not have the connections of a wizard, they would not be able to buy the corresponding magic crystals no matter how many gold coins they had. All wizard resources were traded with magic crystals, not gold coins. Have you saved enough magic crystals to buy the awakening potion? If it's enough, I can help you buy a catalytic potion. I'll be able to gather enough next year. I heard that Dagon is recruiting adventurers to explore the Black Forest. Each mission will cost 10 mana crystals. I want to give it a try. After hearing Jack's words, a faint smile appeared on Wizard Lagu's face. On account of your diligent service these past few days, I'll give you a word of warning. No matter what, don't go to Dagon. Don't leave Alovis, no matter how good the reward is. Perhaps one day in the future, you'll find that the only safe place in this world is Alovis. After a few simple words of advice, Magus Lagu shut his mouth. After all, the matter of the demon wave was limited to the small circle of magi. All the magi who knew about it had signed a confidentiality agreement with their families, and the truth would not be leaked to the mortal world. Therefore, this simple reminder was the best Wizard Lagu could do to salvage the situation. If Jack was determined to leave Alovis and go to Dagon, he and his family would be at risk when the demon wave erupted. Alovis was the headquarters of the Crimson family, and it was also the base of the Horton Academy. Their powerful family's strength allowed them to guard this place impenetrably. No matter how fierce the demon wave was, Alovis would always be the safest and most peaceful place in the central part of the continent. There was no other. The blazing flame monarch. Grim sat calmly on a fiery red stone chair, listening to Meryl and Amelia's report through the magic mirror. After years of hard work, the White Tower has expanded to a space of 300 miles in the dark forest. With Doffland City blocking the way, the magical creatures in the dark forest can't charge out. Doffland City has a population of 20,000, and there are nearly 100 mercenary teams of various sizes. There's also a team of 12 wizards stationed there all year round. In the near future, I'm planning to build a medium-sized wizard pagoda in Doffland City to ensure that the family's efforts over the past 200 years won't be destroyed by the demon wave. Currently, I have enough basic manpower on my side, but I'm still lacking high-level wizards. This is especially so since the Wizard's Pagoda in Doffland will need a high-level wizard to oversee it in the future. I'll need more support from you. Teacher, after listening to Meryl's report in one breath, Grimm's expression remained indifferent. His fingers tapped on the porcelain cup in his hand as he watched the slight ripples appear and slowly disappear. The rising steam carried a refreshing fragrance in the room. I know you want to send Blitz over, but the situation in the central region doesn't allow it. He has to stay there. Grimm raised his hand to stop Meryl from arguing. He said in a low voice, "You also need manpower. I'll send Aratina and her Green Dragon team over. That way, you won't have to worry about a lack of manpower." Yes. Hearing that it was the Emerald Dragon Aratina and the Green Dragon team, Meryl's face immediately lit up. After all these years of interaction, she and Aratina had become close partners. Furthermore, they both had the blood of the dragon tribe flowing in their veins. The closeness that came from the depths of their souls was something no one else could replace. After Meryl finished speaking, It was naturally Amelia's turn to control Alovis and the Crimson Wing. Master, after years of development, the dark forest to the east of the blazing flame monarch has fallen into the family's control. Medusa has gathered a rather strong team there, helping the family to stabilize the surrounding territories. However, there's still a lack of stable support. Currently, we've chosen 3: Eaglehead Mountain, Shattered Wood Valley, and Spider Forest. I'm preparing to build a small city in Shattered Wood Valley as a necessary stronghold. When the demon wave erupts, we'll send 2 giant floating ships and a magic dragon number 1 there to hold the fort. It won't be too difficult to deal with the horde of beasts. As for the space cracks that might appear in the territory, I've already mobilized all of the Scarlet Magi and Acolytes to investigate the entire Alobis region, marking out every singularity and crack in space and sealing them. For those that aren't too dangerous, we'll mainly seal them. For those that have the risk of turning into space cracks, we'll repair the War Wizard's Pagoda according to the degree of danger. I believe that with these measures, when the demon wave erupts, the damage the Scarlet territory will suffer will be minimized. Grimm listened quietly. After confirming that there were no loopholes in the arrangements, he turned his gaze to Cabby, who was at the corner of the screen. Seeing that it was finally his turn to speak, Cabby immediately gestured and reported, "My lord, the new magical puppet dragon number 2 will be ready for battle soon. What do you think?" Hearing this news, a smile finally appeared on Grimm's face. "What about the giant floating ships? The family only has 10 giant floating ships now, and it's not enough. I hope to gather 20 of them before the demon wave arrives. That shouldn't be a problem, right? 20? Cabby, who had been beaming with joy just a moment ago, suddenly froze, swallowing his saliva as he said, "My lord, you should know that after all these years of drilling and mining, the mineral reserves in the Goblin Dimension are almost depleted. Even if I mobilize all the gnome engineers to work day and night, we won't be able to do it without sufficient magic iron alloy." "You don't have to worry about the magic iron alloy." Grimm cut him off. "I found an iron mountain for you in the outer regions. The only thing you need to do now is to dispatch goblin engineers to set up a smelting factory there and refine all of the metal ore's outer regions." Cabby's legs cramped when he heard this terrifying name. That was a forbidden zone for all beings in the dimension. Even a Grade 2 Magus would be in great danger if he ventured into the outer regions, much less the goblin engineers who did not have many defensive measures. "Don't worry, I've already made arrangements there. The otherworldly brain Gazlu will be in charge of protecting the goblins. Just let them focus on their work." At this point, Grimm changed the topic. "Furthermore, I don't intend to transfer all 10 of the new giant floating ships. Leave half of them to defend the Goblin Dimension. The Goblin Plane is a low-magic plane to begin with. Even if the planar gate is opened, there won't be many people willing to go there. 5 giant floating airships, 3,000 new combat magic machines, and that Demon Dragon number 2. This kind of power should be more than enough to protect the entire Goblin Plane." Yes. I thank you on behalf of all the goblins for your concern, my lord." In a magic mirror, Cabby and the other goblin leaders behind him could not help but heave a sigh of relief, a smile appearing on their faces. "However, I still need to deploy the Goblin Mechanical Warlock Corps as a mobile force on standby in Alovis. After all, the center of the continent is too big, and any mistake could lead to a disaster. Hence, a powerful and mobile rapid response force is necessary." After playing with the red dates, Grimm gave new instructions without batting an eyelid. Cabby and the other goblin leaders hurriedly complied, not daring to voice any opinions. The mana tide was about to erupt, and if the Goblin Dimension took advantage of the mana tide to do anything, the Crimson family would be in a difficult position. Hence, no matter how much trust Grimm had in Cabby, Gonga, and the others, he still needed to have the necessary means to control them. This Goblin Mechanical Warlock Corps of 3,000 people was the cream of the crop that the Goblin Dimension had gathered over the years and included almost all the goblins with combat talent. If any of the goblin leaders wanted to break free from the Crimson family's control, they would have to consider the 3,000 goblins held hostage by Grimm. Chapter 1359. The day of the magic wave's outbreak was like a death knell, driving the massive machine in the middle of the continent, full of rust and rotten parts, to start creaking and slowly operating. It had to be said that the middle of the continent was indeed the most densely populated and resource-rich region in the entire sorcerer's world. Although the middle of the continent had been in a state of fragmentation for the past tens of thousands of years. However, its superior innate genes allowed it to possess a core that could gather its power. In an instant, it would radiate with exuberant vitality and powerful life force, causing everyone who was familiar with it to feel secretly shocked. The wizards of the association who had stirred up trouble in the middle of the continent had also retreated to the east and began the arduous and long work of building the tower around the Black Ink Valley. If the space crack in the middle of the continent was a graceful lady, then the space crack in the Black Ink Valley that was sealed was a mammoth. The size of the two wasn't on the same order of magnitude, and the headache it brought to the wizards of the association was even greater. The wizards of the association who were responsible for building the tower in the Black Ink Valley almost wanted to commit suicide. In a narrow area of nearly 100 miles, they wanted to stuff more than 5 high-level wizard pagodas in one go without interfering with each other, and for the elemental altar to work normally. This almost unreasonable request was simply an unsolvable problem, and it drove the director of the association who was responsible for this matter crazy. One had to know that the core component of a wizard pagoda was the elemental altar hidden deep inside. It relied on the elemental altar to continuously draw magical energy from the elemental world and the void dimension to support the endless elemental needs of the wizard tower. According to the experience of building the wizard tower in the past, 2 elemental altars were close to 100 miles apart, and the elemental disturbances caused by the crazy absorption of magical energy would cause unpredictable energy resonance, and thus affect the stability of the surrounding void dimension. At that time, the 5 wizard pagodas built in the Black Ink Valley would operate at the same time, and before the enemy could attack, the space interference caused by them would be able to kill them. But if they couldn't build multiple wizard pagodas, it meant that when a magic wave surged, there would only be 1 wizard pagoda in the Black Ink Valley to support the wizards. In the face of the terrifying star beasts with thick skin, sharp magical attacks, and amazing magical defense, this support was too weak. As a last resort, the Wizard Association had to find another way and set up an energy exchange pool somewhere 100 miles away from the Dark Ink Valley, using the alien technology of the Arcane Kingdom to provide energy support for the Wizard's Pagoda at the front line. This would indeed prevent more Wizard Pagodas from interfering with each other's operations, but would also leave a fatal weakness in the overall battle plan. It wasn't hard to imagine that when a magic tide broke through the spatial crack and a large number of astral beasts and strange creatures swarmed in, it would be a test of the courage of the association's magi. If something happened to the energy exchange pool at that time, to be honest, the higher-ups of the association did not even dare to imagine such a scene. Even the Sorcerer Association, which was the most powerful organization in the world, had to tread carefully in the face of the great mana tide. Naturally, the other 2 organizations would not dare to be careless. Unexpectedly, the entire sorcerer world suddenly became unprecedentedly peaceful and quiet. All the wizard organizations were like ants building a nest. They wanted to protect their own land tightly before the storm came, so that no wind or rain could escape. Although they did not openly announce it to the outside world, all kinds of cautious and crazy behavior of building towers still caused quite a stir in the mortal world. Time flew by quickly. When 8 years had passed, and the preparation work of the wizards was nearing its end, the news of the imminent arrival of the great mana tide spread in the mortal world on a large scale. And the people who spread the news turned out to be a bunch of lunatics. Yes, just as the great mana tide was about to arrive, a bunch of lunatics suddenly appeared in various major cities and small towns. Some of them claimed to be prophets, and some claimed that a great will had appeared in their dreams, crazily announcing the arrival of a terrifying era to the people. At first, the rulers and nobles of the human countries snorted at this and all of them were imprisoned. But strangely, the more they were imprisoned and killed, the more lunatics appeared. In the end, even the upper echelons of these human nations became skeptical and uneasy. With their skills and political sense, they quickly realized that the direction of the wind was not right. Because when they secretly asked the wizards they were familiar with, the answers they received were so vague and confusing. Compared to the wizards, the memory and fear of the great manatide of the mortals had become abnormally blurred over the long years, to the point that they knew nothing about it. The legends and information about the great manatide in the mortal world had been destroyed by the wizards, so the mortals had no way of knowing how to deal with the upcoming crisis. Naturally, the people who could become the rulers of the human countries were not stupid. From a moment they smelled the danger, they began to escape in a different way. No one knew where would be a pure land and where would become a terrible battlefield, but it was never wrong to rely on the strong. Therefore, a large number of nobles quietly sent their direct descendants or the more outstanding descendants of their own families to the tower guarded by the wizards. After all, in their hearts, the wizard tower was the symbol of absolute power and the last fortress that would never fall. Families could suffer setbacks and territories could be lost, but as long as the root was still there was hope for everything. The last 2 years passed by quickly. North, Tower of Destiny. 2 witches, one old and one young, stood silently in the center of the astrology hall, looking up at the dark and deep night sky. There, in the deepest part of the sea of magic, bursts of strange energy waves were stirring the starry sky, scouring the stars. The stars were shining, burning, emitting far more bright lights than usual, illuminating the entire night sky. These lights intertwined with each other, as if an unprecedented battle was taking place. One after another, the stars exhausted their starlight power, and finally became much dimmer and more obscure. Some stars even swayed and fell, cutting through the stars and disappearing into the depths of the darkness. For a moment, the beautiful and bright starry sky became so heroic and brilliant. The great manatide has begun. Alice looked up at the starry sky. Her ivory-like face looked so charming and beautiful under the light of the stars, and her bright eyes directly reflected the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Even though he had been expecting and prepared for this scene, when he saw that the deepest shadow in the night sky was still expanding and devouring the entire starry sky bit by bit, he could not help but feel a chill down his spine. Even with Alice's calmness, she couldn't help but sigh faintly. Teacher, standing quietly behind Alice, the beautiful girl, Lucia, who was only 16 or 17 years old, showed a trace of melancholy and confusion on her face. She hesitated for a long time and finally asked, "Is the outbreak of the great manatide related to the arcane kingdom?" After studying with Alice for so long, as a level 2 astrologer and a level 1 arcanist, Lucia could naturally perceive something from the violent changes in the starry sky. Since you've already noticed it, you shouldn't ask. All the answers can only be found by yourself. Remember, as an astrologer who has dedicated herself to fate, fate will always be with you. And all you need to do is to open your mind and truly accept it. Speaking of this, Alice turned around, looked at Lucia quietly, and sighed with a doting face. Are you still not willing to dedicate yourself to fate? My life and soul belong to arcane magic. Except for arcane magic, I won't dedicate myself to a second object. Lucia was still so determined. Alice sighed quietly and said, "If you accept fate, fate is your weapon, your life, it's everything to you. But if you refuse fate, it will be your biggest burden. You have to think about it." A bright smile appeared on Lucia's face, and she said loudly, "From the moment I was resurrected on the first day, I've already thought about it. Everything I have belongs to arcane magic, and I can't dedicate it to others anymore." Alice sighed faintly again, no longer entangled in this issue, and turned back to continue to look up at the starry sky. She knew that at this moment, there were countless strong people from countless planes looking up at the same starry sky. and their hearts were probably filled with emotions just like her. Silver Alliance. The crisp and melodious sound of the bell reverberated throughout the Sky Castle. Countless Alliance wizards in silver robes rushed out of their residences and laboratories, occupied all the rooftops and balconies, and quietly looked up at the bright burning starry sky. They were silently chanting the terrible word, full of magic and awe in their hearts. Demon Tide. After 10 years of waiting and preparation, the anticipated Demon Tide finally began to break out. The towering obelisk, with its base buried in the Goldstone Square and its top submerged in a powerful and strange void vortex, also shone brightly at the same time. On the body of the obelisk, rows and rows of abstruse and mysterious magic runes lit up one after another, forming a gorgeous rune belt floating above the Goldstone Square. This was the forbidden area of the Silver Alliance, and even those Grade 4 counselors were not allowed to step into it without permission. However, just as the berserk magical wave erupted and the steel reacted to it, it started to emit light. 2 light gates lit up on the plaza at the same time, and 2 elderly wizards wearing pointy hats and old wizard robes came out from within. They were holding wizard staffs. They stepped out of the light gate and saw each other. The old man on the left put his hand on his chest and said bitterly, "Welcome back, Lord Douglas." Chapter 1360. The Master of the Prophet Tower raised his head calmly. "I would like to ask you to return and not interfere with the internal affairs of the sorcerer world." "I've just returned, and you want to chase me away?" Douglas could not help but widen his eyes. "I'm not chasing you away. I'm asking you. As an old friend, I don't want to see you get dragged back into the whirlpool of fate. So, give up and return to the outer regions. Let them settle the central continent themselves." "Yeah. Did you see something?" Douglas asked in a low voice. The old master of the tower shook his head silently and did not reply. He turned around and retreated into the light door. Douglas could clearly see that a few deep wrinkles had appeared on the old man's forehead after he said those few words. When he turned his body, it seemed that even his body was a little weaker than it had been before. Backlash of fate. His old friend had only said a few words to him, yet he had already suffered such a severe backlash of fate. Even the clone of a great magus could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Perhaps he really should not have returned this time. The blazing flame monarch. Like all the other magi, Grimm stood quietly in the wizard hall, silently sensing the turbulence in the depths of the sea of magic with the help of the tower. The tide of magic had just erupted, and the front of the tide had yet to reach the sorcerer world. Thus, there were no abnormal changes in the plane. However, this peace would not last for long. The moment the tide washed over the sorcerer world, everything here would change. Those who could not adapt to this change would obviously be eliminated by the world. At this moment, there must be many magi like him spying on every single change in the depths of the sea of stars, silently waiting for the expected change to arrive. Just as Grimm was about to lose control of his emotions, he suddenly swayed slightly and almost fell. Grimm raised his head and scanned the surroundings. The wizard's pagoda did not shake, and the ground was still as calm as before. What had truly shaken him was not the outside world, but his heart. When a wisp of his spiritual will was embedded in the formless yet omnipresent law of fire, the tremors and ripples from the power system of the plane became even more obvious. The mana tide had already swept into the sorcerer's world. In the boundless, empty void, a vast torrent that resembled a tide of magic washed out from the depths of the sea of stars, surging and roaring along the way, causing the material worlds that were floating within the dimensional barriers to churn and shake, turning upside down. Due to the protection of the planar barrier, the mana tide was unable to invade the interior of the planar barrier. However, as the violent energy washed and surged, faint cracks appeared on the planar barrier. If a plane barrier was the size of a watermelon, then these cracks would be as fine as a strand of hair. It looked inconspicuous, but strands of void energy could seep into the interior of the plane through the cracks in space, stirring up terrifying energy hurricanes. The sky of the sorcerer world suddenly turned dark red and gloomy. It was as if a red-hot torch had suddenly pierced a huge hole in the sky, and a continuous sea of flames and raging energy hurricanes appeared on the horizon. Strange cracking sounds resounded between heaven and earth, and the red clouds tumbled and shook like boiling blood. Countless jungle beasts and herbivores drilled out of their nests in fear, silently watching the sky that was almost on fire, as well as the dark shadow that occupied the sky and was still slowly expanding. Finally, a part of the sky could not withstand the scouring of the mana tide, and with a tearing sound, a 10-meter-long spatial crack was torn open. Thus, the void hurricane from the outer realm rushed into the interior of the plane without any obstruction. Under the blow of the invisible void hurricane, the towering mountain peak was like a cake that was rapidly rotting, losing its green and becoming bony, towering and terrifying. The soft soil, along with everything on it, was twisted into fragments that were difficult to see with the naked eye, whistling as they were swept into the distance. The green on the ground was rapidly disappearing. Plants, trees, shrubs, moss, grass, and even the tens of thousands of beasts, birds, insects, and earthworms that lived on this land disappeared without a trace in an instant. Not even the last trace was left. It was as if the earth was shaved layer by an invisible razor. The flora and fauna disappeared, the soil disappeared, the sand and stones disappeared. Subsequently, even the exposed rock foundation splashed with dazzling sparks under the blow of the energy hurricane. Fortunately, the sorcerer world was also one of the largest planes in the multiverse, and the strength of the plane's barrier was also far stronger than that of ordinary planes. Thus, most of the spatial cracks only existed for a few seconds before they closed up again, also blocking the subsequent erosion of the mana tide. However, it was this few seconds of devastation that brought the interior of the plane a terrible calamity that would never be forgotten. The plane's barrier was still strong, resisting the scouring of the mana tide. With a mighty scouring of the front end of the mana tide, although the subsequent mana tide was turbulent and endless, it did not bring any more terrible damage to the plane's barrier. However, the weak points or spatial cracks that existed in the past on the plane's barrier were all opened up with the undulation of the mana tide. In the center of the continent, a large spatial crack. In the sky, the dark shadow that stretched for thousands of meters was crazily twisting and struggling. On the ground, 3 wizard towers were located in different places, and a huge pillar of light, as thick as a stone pillar, shot out from the top of the towers, firmly resisting the expansion of the dark shadow. Around the wizard towers, there were many war wizard pagodas that were like burning torches, emitting a magical radiance, supporting a huge energy barrier that firmly protected the whole stronghold. The pillar of light from the wizard pagodas and the dark shadow were frantically competing. Finally, under the repeated scouring of the mana tide, the dark shadow split open once more, turning into a dark red rift that blew a void hurricane of terrifying energy level in from outside. The entire stronghold of the Arden family was instantly surrounded by the invisible void hurricane, and the ground protected by the energy barrier was still relatively stable, not suffering any damage. However, in the areas that were not protected by the energy barrier, the ground was being shaved off at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sparks flew on the energy barrier, and heavenly fire spread everywhere. In the wizard tower that supported the energy barrier, the Arden family's wizards were running and shouting, turning off one auxiliary wizard spell formation after another, and transferring the saved magical energy to the light barrier. With the support of the 3 wizard pagodas, the stronghold of the Arden family finally resisted the first wave of the mana tide. When the light barrier adapted to the strength of the void hurricane and became stable again, all the wizards let out a long sigh of relief. Enthusiastic but short cheers came from the wizard pagoda. Andrews, who had a nervous look on his face, clenched his fists and let out a long sigh of relief. He calmed himself down, slowly rubbed the snake eye ring on his right pinky, and asked in a deep voice, "The first wave of the mana tide has passed. Inform the family members to still stick to their posts and not to leave without permission. In addition, Before Andrews could finish his sentence, he suddenly stopped. He opened his eyes wide and stared at the giant light screen in front of him. There, in the space crack, a strange creature that looked like a swordfish had rushed into the dimensional barrier along with the Void Hurricane. The Void Hurricane, which could kill everything in the world, seemed harmless to it. With a slight movement of its shiny black body, it could use the Void Hurricane to travel quickly in the sky. With such a terrifying speed, most wizard spells would not be able to catch up to it. Star Beast. It's a Star Beast. Prepare to attack immediately. Andrews immediately roared loudly. As he roared, the 3 wizard pagodas shone with a dazzling light, and magical lightning streaked across the sky, striking the body of the fish-shaped Star Beast. However, something that shocked them happened in the next second. The fish-shaped Star Beast absorbed all the lightning, which seemed like it could destroy the world, and turned it into a golden lightning bolt, striking the energy barrier. Even though it was 1 against 3, and 3 terrifying wizard pagodas at that, the golden lightning bolt caused the energy barrier to tremble. If not for the 3 wizard pagodas sharing some of the damage, the energy barrier might have been pierced through, opening a path into the base. Andrews could not help but furrow his brows deeply. He could clearly sense that this was only a level 4 beginner Star Beast, but it could use its powerful racial ability to fight against the 3 wizard pagodas. This had clearly surpassed the limits of his imagination. Changed to another elemental wizard spell. Andrews gave a new order. Since lightning element wizard spells could not hurt it, he would change to another elemental system. He did not believe that this initial grade 4 fish-shaped astral beast could be immune to all domains. In the next second, a torrent of crimson flames engulfed the Star Beast. But just like the last time, the Star Beast did not dodge. It once again absorbed the flames into its body, then opened its mouth and spat out a crimson golden fireball. Change again, continue. What made Andrew's scalp numb was that this strange Star Beast that had accidentally intruded into the wizard world was truly immune to all domains of magic. Not only was it immune, it could also absorb elemental damage and convert it into magical elements to counterattack. Long-range wizard spells were obviously not the best way to deal with a Star Beast like this. Let your wizard's pagoda rest for a while. This Star Beast is quite interesting. I'll go play with it. Just as Andrews was hesitating, a coquettish female voice rang in his mind. Chapter 1361. Mary's tyrannical appearance attracted the attention of the fish-shaped astral beast the moment she appeared. Both of them were grade 4 creatures and had an extraordinarily sharp intuition towards the dangerous aura of the other. However, to the astral beasts, they were the predators that wandered the depths of the sea of stars, and the beings of other planes were just prey. As for whether the prey was strong or not, the only difference was the difficulty of the hunt. Hence, the moment this strange astral beast discovered Mary, it launched a ferocious attack. This fish-shaped astral beast was 10 meters long, and its entire body was flat and narrow. It had a sharp mouth, back, and 2 sides of its body had sharp fins. Its appearance was similar to a deep-sea, spindle-shaped ribbon fish. However, its appearance was more ruthless, malevolent, and ugly. The strength of this strange astral beast lay in its innate ability to devour magic. Its seemingly smooth black body had an abnormally strange energy field on its surface, which could disrupt any spell structure, causing it to revert back to chaotic and disorderly magic energy. Then, it could devour the magic energy and convert it into its own power to attack the enemy. With this ability, it was practically the natural enemy of all elemental magi. However, if one thought that it was weak in close combat, just because it had the innate ability to devour magic, then one would be gravely mistaken. Its long and sharp mouth and smooth, sharp fins, propelled by extreme speed, were comparable to Grade 4 anti-magic weapons. Even in close combat, this astral beast's destructive power far surpassed that of other planes creatures. The fish-shaped astral beasts were known for their speed and magic devouring, and Mary, who had made a grand entrance, was also known for her extraordinary agility. When the two fellows, who both relied on speed to make a living, came together, the battle scene was simply unbearable. It was truly unbearable, and not just a description. One fish and one human were like two erratic ghosts, chasing and killing each other, leaving a series of afterimages in the sky that were difficult to distinguish with the naked eye. Both sides chased and strangled each other, using all sorts of methods to tear off a piece of flesh from each other's body. The danger of the battle was not inferior to a bloody battlefield in the slightest. Human magi relied more on magic tools, magic items, and all sorts of scrolls, potions, and instant magic wands to fight. Although human magi could also activate powerful elemental spells, when fighting at the same rank, the enemy would not usually give them enough time to cast spells. Therefore, when Mary was fighting, she almost gave up on all methods of attack that required casting spells, and only focused on simple and quick physical attacks. As for her witchcraft ability, it was all manifested in the 3 witchcraft special effects of laceration, bleeding, and sharpness on the beast's sting dagger. Mary was indeed a blood witch. All of her fighting methods revolved around creating wounds for her enemies. As long as the enemy was wounded and bled, the blood shaman would only become stronger and braver as he fought. In the end, her enemies would be horrified to find that they were fighting with their own blood. No matter how he attacked or how he attacked Mary, he would only lose his life energy. This was actually the most powerful and troublesome aspect of the blood wizards. The fish-shaped star beast only realized this after fighting for a while. After all, it was good at swallowing monsters. Its speed was only fast compared to other creatures. In the face of Mary, an assassin-type blood, who specialized in agility, its speed was not worth mentioning. One wrong move, and his hands and feet were tied. Although its speed was fast enough, it was still a little slower than Mary's. With this, it was enough for Mary to play with it like she was playing with a baby. The two of them fought for a quarter of an hour. Mary was completely unscathed, but the star beast had 3 scars on its body that were deep enough to reach its bones. The strange skin on the surface of the opponent's body might have the powerful abilities of submerged demon and swallowed demon, but it was obvious that its physical defense was much weaker. Seeing that it could not catch up to Mary and was even injured, the fish-shaped star beast was extremely furious. It could clearly feel the wisps of blood energy dissipating from its wounds, and even its life energy was slowly flowing away. The thin body of the enemy, not far away, was also surging with blood energy, as if it was slowly absorbing its life energy through its wounds. The fish-shaped star beast was not stupid, and it immediately changed its tactics. With a swing of its long tail, it quickly distanced itself from Mary's blood-red figure. After pulling away a certain distance, it opened its mouth wide and shot a jet-black poisonous arrow at Mary. Since I can't beat you in close combat, I'll use long-range attacks. After pulling a distance, the fish-shaped star beast seemed to be half a spellcaster. At least, its poisonous arrow had multiple magical properties of poison and corrosion. It was still difficult for ordinary creatures to defend against it. Since you're serious, I'll let you see my true power. Mary laughed softly, and her whole body turned into a bloody light. She dodged the poisonous arrow and pounced at the opponent. Seeing that the other party was approaching, the fish-shaped star beast did not dodge. It coiled its body and used its sharp fins and tail to protect its torso. It opened its mouth wide and spat out another poisonous arrow that turned into black water toward Mary. Koslin, help me suppress its mind. Yes. In the hidden mental channel, Mary and Kathleen had always maintained the closest connection. Taking advantage of the moment when the opponent was about to defend and counterattack, Mary gave Koslin the first order since the start of the battle. The next moment, a gloomy and cold spiritual wave entangled the fish-shaped star beast, and the two extremely powerful spiritual consciousnesses pulled at each other crazily. Coastland wanted to pull the Star Beast's consciousness into the nightmare weave, and the Star Beast naturally struggled with all its might, hoping to break free from the mental suppression. The two powerful consciousnesses collided and tangled, and in an instant, the victor was decided. Coastland lost, and the Star Beast won. However, the victorious Star Beast could not help but feel sluggish. Its defensive movements became slightly stiff and deformed. But this little bit of time was enough for Mary. The blood energy in Mary's body was instantly raised to the limit. Her body, which was originally only a series of afterimages, became a thin line of blood that pierced straight through the center of the fish-shaped Star Beast's body. Defense failed. A strange cry that sounded like a cow's roar echoed throughout the battlefield. The fish-shaped Star Beast was unharmed a moment ago, but in the next moment, its stomach and intestines were pierced. Its flesh and blood turned into a fountain of blood that splashed everywhere. There was a giant bloody hole in the middle of its 10-meter-long body. Pitch-black fish blood and pieces of flesh rained down from the sky. However, even with such severe injuries, the level 4 Star Beast did not die. Instead, it endured the pain and turned around to escape into the distance. Looking at its speedy figure, it seemed that even its speed wasn't affected much. Thunderous cheers and cheers immediately came from the wizard's pagoda below the battlefield. Trying to escape? No way. It was Mary's first time attacking, and she did not manage to catch any prey. How could she tolerate such a situation? She decided to spread her bat wings and give chase. However, in the next moment, Wizard Andrews had already silently appeared in front of her, blocking her path. Lady Mary, don't be in such a hurry. Move aside. I'll settle the score with you if my prey gets lost. Don't worry, Lady Mary. I've already sent the pterosaur team. Andrews had a smile on his face, but there was a hint of fear and respect in his eyes. He said, that Star Beast is heavily injured. The pterosaur team is more than enough to take care of it. The space crack is an important matter, and it cannot be left without you. Let them chase after the prey. Don't worry, that prey will be delivered to you unscathed in less than half a day. As if to verify his words, a dozen black dots rose from a wizard's pagoda at the end of the horizon. They let out sharp cries as they chased after the direction the Star Beast had escaped. That was a mixed-blood pterosaur with level 3 abilities. Paired with a level 3 wizard, its basic battle capabilities were not to be underestimated. Remember to send the prey to my castle immediately after you catch it. This Star Beast's strange magic engulf attribute is very rare. I still have to study it properly. After proudly declaring her sovereignty, Mary retracted her bat wings and transformed into a ray of red light as she charged into the sky. She disappeared into a strange, ancient castle that was protected by many war wizard pagodas. After seeing Mary leave, Andrews stood silently in the sky. Above him, the space crack was still churning and trembling, spewing out terrifying void hurricanes that could corrode one's bones and corrode one's flesh. In such an environment, an ordinary person would not even be able to last 3 seconds before their flesh and blood would corrode, their bones would crumble, and they would be torn to shreds by the berserk energy. Even if it was a wizard who left the protection of the wizard's pagoda and wanted to move freely on the battlefield, they would have to put up an elemental shield. Otherwise, their lives would be in danger. Only high-level wizards like him or Mary could use their formless life force field to block the void hurricanes outside their bodies, and their movements would not be restricted. As for the Star Beasts, they were like fish in water in this cruel environment that wizards regarded as a land of death. Not only did they not feel any pressure from the void hurricanes, but they could also use the fluctuations of the magic tide to create torrents of energy, turning them into their own weapons. Thus, in such an environment, high-level wizards could only endure it, while the Star Beasts could completely blend in and adapt to it. It was just this small difference, but it imperceptibly magnified and widened the gap between the wizards and the Star Beasts. Andrews was a bloodline wizard, and he could transform into a berserk giant lizard. He had powerful defense and biting strength, and he also had the terrifying ability to petrify. However, with his abilities, it might be easy to defeat the Star Beast, but it would be extremely difficult to make it stay. In fact, if the Star Beast was a little more cunning and engaged in guerrilla warfare, Andrews might lose the support of the Wizard's Pagoda, and the chances of him losing the battle would be higher. However, such a Star Beast that was not inferior to him had been heavily injured by Mary. Moreover, looking at the way she fought, it seemed that she did not use her full power, and this made him even more fearful. Even though he knew that after a wizard grew up, their respective talents and wizard equipment would widen the gap between them. However, he could only look on helplessly as an extremely young junior grew to a level that he had to look up to. Chapter 1362. The arrival of the Mana-Tide was a difficult test for all the planes. Of course, with the Magus world's massive size and powerful Magi community, no other races or monsters could shake this huge civilization. However, the safety of the entire Magus civilization did not mean that all the families and organizations would be unscathed. On the contrary, in this period of chaos, any Magus family or organization could suffer huge losses if they were not careful, and thus lose their previous advantageous position. This was the main reason why many Magi were wary of the magic tide. Even the powerful Magus world had to be careful in the face of the magic tide, and those medium and small planes that were weaker than the Magus world as a whole were even more vulnerable. When the magic tide arrived, when a magic tide could no longer protect the internal space like before, the aboriginals would have to face the turbulent void hurricanes and ferocious astral beasts and monsters. Other than dying, there was no other way out. After all, in a confrontation between planes, being weak was a sin. Goblin Plain, Ironstone Wasteland. This was a desolate and lonely red land. The soil contained too much iron, aluminium, and other minerals. There was little organic matter and strong acidity, making it impossible to grow any green plants. The land that stretched for close to 100 miles was barren. Apart from the proud red mountain peaks and the stone pillars that had been corroded by the acid rain, there were no other living creatures. As the soil was acidic and dark red, it looked as if it had been soaked in blood under the sunlight. Hence, this place was given the title of Land of the Devils. Since it was impossible to grow crops, it was naturally impossible to feed the population. Hence, the red soil of the Ironstone Wasteland did not cover any goblin towns, and it was even more impossible for there to be large-scale intelligent life activities. However, in this deathly silence, a loud roar suddenly sounded from afar. Following that, a fully armed goblin convoy appeared in their field of vision. The heavy goblin chariot's steel tracks crushed the hard red roadbed, and the golden magic cannon at the top of the chariot rotated. From time to time, the cannon's muzzle would point at a dark and gloomy corner. A gnome wearing a leather headgear and tactical goggles peeked out from the top of the first tank. He raised his binocular telescope and scanned the surrounding mountain peaks and stone pillar hills. The terrain here was especially treacherous, and the environment was a terrible mess. Clearly, it was not suitable for the survival of any intelligent life. But before the arrival of the Mana Wave, the gnome caravan didn't dare to relax or slack off. They meticulously patrolled this weak region of space. Yes, one of the main reasons why the Iron Rock Wasteland was so desolate was because it was a weak point in space. The chaotic magical energy that seeped in from the outside world had changed the environment of this plane and caused the elemental energy to be out of balance, thus creating the strange red soil. The goblin convoy consisted of 11 goblin chariots, equipped with magic cannons, goblin missiles, and combat equipment. Their task was to patrol this ironstone wasteland regularly to make sure that no creatures from other planes had taken advantage of the demon wave eruption to sneak into the goblin plane. Of course, to better complete the patrolling work, the higher-ups had also provided a gnome helicopter to each convoy. Hence, as the gnome caravan thundered across the red soil, A gnome helicopter with the serial number Flying Fish flew over their heads at a low altitude. Then, it drew a beautiful arc and flew toward the lone red peak on the right. Commander Parker's green fur outside his leather hat danced wildly in the strong winds. He lowered his body and pressed on the communication crystal in his ear, roaring loudly. "Morris, you bastard. Don't fly so close to the convoy. Damn it, my eardrums are about to burst from your terrible noise. Remember, fly higher and check out the 27th district. The equipment shows that the ceiling spell formation there has been touched. It's very likely that something bad has sneaked in. You have to be careful. Roger, Flying Fish. Pilot Morris salutes you. I'll head to Area 27 now." Commander Parker slammed his hand on the carriage and pointed in the direction of the gnome helicopter. Only then did he raise his binoculars and track the situation of the other party. The entire gnome caravan suddenly changed direction and rushed towards a huge stone forest. However, before the caravan could get within 3 miles of the stone forest, the gnome helicopter that was flying at a low altitude was attacked by a flock of birds. Fortunately, the pilot of Flying Fish, Morris, had some skill. He actually managed to maneuver the helicopter to dodge left and right, breaking out of the siege of the birds. Then, he suddenly turned around and flew back towards the caravan. Commander Parker, who had been deeply worried, was elated when he saw this. He hurriedly commanded the caravan to quickly get into a defensive formation. Amidst the creaking sounds of metal, the magical cannons quickly adjusted their muzzles. The supporting metal legs on both sides of the caravan were also nailed into the ground. A layer of faint blue light combined to envelop the entire caravan. The goblin helicopter flew straight for the convoy. When it was about to reach the range of the convoy's cannons, the helicopter suddenly flipped to the side, drawing a strange arc as it flew away, revealing the strange flying beasts that were making strange sounds as they chased after them. This was a flock of strange birds that had never been seen before. They looked like large ducks, but there was no hair on their long necks. There was only a strange red sack on each side of their heads. They were not large in size, and their feathers were dark red. Their flying speed was even more average. If it wasn't for the fear of losing them halfway, the speed of the gnome helicopter would have shaken them off long ago. The current gnome plane was no longer the gnome plane of the past. After being influenced by the wizard civilization, the gnomes, who had always been immune to magic, had also gained a wide range of knowledge and rich experience in the plane. Thus, the Goblin Commander Parker only needed 2 fingers to identify these monsters. Fire crows. This was a flock of fire crows that had the ability to spit fire. The strange red sacs on both sides of their parotid glands were where they store their strange saliva. When they spat out this saliva, it would quickly expand into a strange fireball the size of a human head upon contact with the air. The power of the attack was half that of a human wizard's fireball, but the exploding flames were terrifyingly sticky and could stick to the enemy's body and continue burning. This was also the most troublesome aspect of the fire crows. A single fire crow was not difficult to deal with, but the difficult part was that the fire crows were magical creatures that gathered in groups. They usually lived in groups. Small groups had 200 to 300 members, and large groups had thousands or even tens of thousands of members. The size of their group depended on whether there was enough food in the area and nothing else. According to Parker's knowledge, there were no fire crows near the Ironstone Wasteland, and there were not many fire crows in the entire gnome plain. Therefore, he dared to conclude that this flock of thousands of fire crows was definitely an outsider that had secretly migrated here through the plain crack. Once they understood the surrounding environment and terrain, they would definitely migrate to a place with more food nearby. Goblins were definitely part of their diet. For the safety of a gnome plain, they could not be allowed to come and go as they pleased. Therefore, when the flock of fire crows could not stop their charge and flew into the attack range, the gnome caravan's magic cannons instantly concentrated fire. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk, a series of energy fireballs flew into the sky and crashed into the flock of fire crows, quickly exploding into a sea of fire. Although the fire crows could spit out flames, that was only due to the special bodily fluids in their bodies. It did not mean that they were fire creatures. Therefore, the gnome caravan's cannons bombarded them with terrifying damage. The battlefield was immediately filled with the angry and hoarse cries of the fire crows and the loud explosions of the energy fireballs. A large number of fire crows were blasted into pieces, and many were scorched black by the flames. Incomplete bird corpses fell from the sky like raindrops. The fire crows that were lucky enough to make it through the fireballs cawed as they swooped down, using strange fireballs the size of human heads to bombard the light blue energy barrier. Unfortunately, their individual strength was still too weak. It was obvious that they could not shake the energy barrier that was supported by the 11 gnome chariots. The surface of the barrier shook violently, but the fireballs that exploded did not scatter. Instead, they turned into streams of scarlet liquid that flowed slowly on the surface. When the scarlet liquid came into contact with the air, it immediately ignited into a sky-high fire, quickly corroding the energy barrier. After all, the number of goblin chariots was still a little low. Although the first wave of attacks had reduced the number of fire crows by half, the number of goblin chariots was not enough. Although the first round of attacks had directly reduced the flock of fire crows by half, the follow-up attacks were like anti-aircraft cannons hitting mosquitoes. The lethality of the attacks had decreased. Usually, after a dozen cannons, the number of fire crows that were killed would only be in the single digits. And such a small number was like a drizzle to the flock of fire crows that were flying around randomly in the sky. There were close to 500 of them. The fire crows continuously flew up and down, trying their best to spit mucus at the energy barrier. From the looks of it, they were planning to burn through the barrier and charge in a fight the gnome chariots. Since the magic cannons could no longer focus fire on them, Parker immediately gave the order to fight. The combat magic devices that were hanging from the rear of the gnome chariots all jumped down and lined up in rows, using concentrated energy rays to attack the approaching fire crows. At this moment, the energy rays that were activated quickly and had almost no flight time were actually more effective than the energy fireballs. Although the power was a little weaker, the densely packed cannons on the bodies of the combat magic devices could still make up for some of the lack of power. Asterisk size star. Chapter 1363. Caw, caw, caw. With a wave of ear-piercing caws, the scattered fire crows suddenly scattered in all directions, choosing to stay away from the goblin caravan and circling outside the range of the cannon's attacks. They no longer used a large-scale assault, but instead formed small attack teams of 2s and 3s, continuously attacking the caravan from all directions and using sticky fire liquid to corrode the energy barrier. Once they completed their attack, they would quickly retreat from the cannon's attack range and continue circling outside, waiting for an opportunity. There weren't too many battle magic machines, not enough to overturn the sky around the formation. Once their cannons were scattered, the damage to the fire crows wouldn't be as great. Seeing this scene, the goblin commander Parker froze and muttered to himself, "Could it be that there's a leader in this flock of fire crows?" Adult fire crows were mostly rank 1 magical creatures. Although their strength wasn't bad, their level of intelligence couldn't compare to humans. Only after the birth of a level 1 or level 2 fire raven king would the intelligence of the entire tribe increase significantly. Only a higher-ranked fire crow king would have such intelligence, seeing through the goblin caravan's inability to move quickly and retreating from the battlefield. Parker immediately picked up his binoculars and did his best to search for the fire crow, king among the fire crows that filled the sky. As expected, Parker followed the direction of the caw and saw a strange fire crow that was exceptionally handsome and much larger in size. There was even a circle of golden feathers on its head, making it look like it was wearing a strange crown from afar. It looked like this fellow had not only become a leader, but was also on the verge of evolving into a king. Monet, pay attention to the Fire Crow King at XXX. I want you to take the Magic Machine Squad and take it down. The caravan will provide you with firepower protection. Parker immediately gave the order to fight once he found the main target. Monet, the captain of the magic machine squad that was hiding inside the battle magic machine and attacking the fire crows, turned around and immediately locked onto the strange-looking fire crow through his tactical goggles and hidden triangular window. "Let's go. Take down that ugly turkey for me." Amidst its arrogant laughter, 11 battle magic machines rushed out of the energy barrier and fired fiercely as they approached the target area. After hundreds of years of technological advancements, the current battle magic machines were no longer comparable to the old steam machines of the past. The standard equipment of the PG-52 battle magic machine was 2 Mark II magic cannons on its shoulders, 2 magic rapid-fire cannons on its chest, 4 magic ray guns on its arms, and 16 goblin missiles in the weapon bag on its back. With such powerful firepower, the PG-52 combat magic machine could rival a Tier 2 wizard. At the very least, on the main battlefield, the metal magical machine squads that were arranged in tight combat formations could be called battlefield cleaners. Wherever they went, goblin missiles would rise into the sky one after another, piercing into the flock of fire crows with ear-piercing shrieks. The warheads were filled with a large number of metal pellets and arcane crystal shards. They exploded continuously in the air, and the scattered metal pellets could completely overturn a large area. The fire crows were flying creatures with outstanding magic resistance, or else they would not be able to pass through the gaps in space so easily. However, they did not have the protection of hard scales, so their physical defense was much weaker. Therefore, facing the barrage of metal pellets that covered the sky, the fire crows were blown away one after another, black blood splattering everywhere as they screeched miserably and fell from the sky. However, even more fire crows exploded angrily and lunged at the battle magic machine squads that had emerged from the energy barrier from all directions. Before the birds arrived, the liquid fire arrived first. Puff, puff, puff. A stream of liquid fire was spat at the battle magic machine squads. "Shield! Shield! Everyone, remember to activate your shield." Monet's scream echoed through the communication crystal. The battle magic machine squads flipped over at every corner of their bodies, revealing rhombus-shaped crystals. They quickly erected energy shields of various shapes as they were injected with magic energy. These energy shields might not be strong individually, but when they overlapped with each other, they had a larger protection angle and higher defensive toughness than the original version of the Mana Shield. Taking advantage of the fact that the energy shields were blocking the liquid fire from all directions, the battle magic machine squads opened fire with all their might. The magic cannons and rapid-fire cannons fired energy fireballs of various sizes, blasting the fire crows that were diving down into a mist of blood. Meanwhile, the quadruple magic ray guns on their arms kept firing, blasting the fire crows into the sky with scorching rays or frost rays. In the communication channel, the goblin mechanics screamed and yelled crazily. At this moment, there was no need for them to give any tactical commands. Blocking the enemy's attacks and focusing their firepower on the enemy was the only thing they could do. Meanwhile, the goblin convoy at the back shifted their cannons to the front, using concentrated volleys of cannons and missiles to clear the path in front of them. This was a cruel path paved with the flesh and blood of the fire crow corpses. The attacks of the fire crows were not without results. After leaving the cover of the energy shields, individual magic machines could not cover every corner. Therefore, under the concentrated attacks of the fire crows, the energy shields of the battle magic machines were either corroded or destroyed. They could only rely on their sturdy metal shells to withstand the corrosion of the liquid fire. Up to this point, the battle magic machine squad had charged 700 meters into the midst of the fire crows, killing or injuring nearly 300 fire crows. They had also lost 2 of their own magic machines. Their metal shells had been burnt through by the liquid fire, causing a huge explosion. There was no reason for the goblin mechanics inside to survive either. At this point, there were less than 200 fire crows left in the large flock. The Raven King was obviously enraged. leading his personal guards to attack the battle magic machine squad. The liquid fire they spat was obviously more powerful and corrosive than normal fire crows. Two more magic machines had their armors burnt through, and the Raven King nailed them to their cabins with a fire arrow. However, the Raven King couldn't find any more opportunities to attack when faced with the combined attacks of the Goblin Convoy and the Magic Machine Squad. After all, the Fire Crows could only spit out 100 meters, while the Magic Machine Squad's attack range was 300 to 700 meters. If the Goblin missiles were included, their attack range was 1,500 meters. This disparity meant that the Fire Crows could only use their flesh and blood to withstand the attacks of the cannons and energy beams. In the end, the Fire Crows were completely defeated. Finally, the Raven King admitted defeat and led the remaining 30 or so Fire Crows out of the battlefield, cawing strangely. The Goblin Convoy could only follow closely behind in order to avoid the disaster that the Fire Crows would bring to the Goblin town. Both sides fought as they retreated into the distance. Similar scenes were playing out in every corner of the Goblin Plain. However, it was a good thing that the Goblin Plain was a typical low magic plain. Even with the arrival of the Demon Wave, the rejection of magic was still as strong as ever. That was why monsters that were too powerful wouldn't even bother to come here. Their targets were the higher planes. Add to that the fact that the number of monsters in the Goblin Plain wasn't large enough to begin with. It was even less likely that they would be able to attack the goblins who had all turned into magic machines. Therefore, since the outbreak of the Great Demon Tide, apart from the sporadic gnome towns suffering heavy losses from the attacks of strange monsters, large-scale casualties were still rare. However, not all planes were as lucky as the Goblin Plain. Almost all material planes were facing attacks from both inside and outside due to the impact of the Demon Wave. There were galactic beasts, calamities, and monsters invading from the outside, and magical beasts attacking from within. In that moment, all those in power and the ruling class had their hands full. No matter how strict their defenses were, they couldn't stop the demons from sneaking in, nor could they stop the beast hordes from surging out of the ancient forests. Therefore, some incompetent people in power could only choose to give up on some commoners and territories, concentrating what little power they had to protect their manors and property. As for the abandoned territories and commoners, they could only pray for their own good. After all, they lacked the protection of extraordinary powers. Even a single Class 1 or 2 monster could cause unimaginable calamity to them if it charged in. And in these many small and medium-sized planes, many intelligent races that had previously occupied the ruling position had given their enemies the chance to rise due to their mistakes in dealing with the Demon Wave. Therefore, internal revolutions broke out in many planes, changing the ruling class. But no matter how hard they tried to stabilize the environment of the plane, a huge upheaval and chaos that engulfed all planes still broke out. The wise men and scholars of many realms unanimously called this chaotic and turbulent era the Dark Age. What made them feel despair and indignation was that according to past experience, this Dark Age would probably last for 100 years. 100 years. To most creatures of plains, that was their entire life. When darkness descended, there was pain and happiness. At this moment, the happiness of the people living in the Alobis region was especially strong. After the Demon Wave broke out, there were rumors of monsters and galactic beasts invading the central continent. In some regions, there were even shocking incidents where entire villages and towns were devoured by the monsters. The more such rumors were heard, the more it served to accentuate the tranquility of the Alovis region. After all, this was the territory of the Crimson family, and it had become the core region of the central continent. Thus, there were more top-notch magi gathered here than elsewhere. Chapter 1364. The eruption of the Demon Tide was like the opening of Pandora's box, bringing great trouble to all the material planes. Grimm had no idea how the other 3 organizations had arranged their plans. All he knew was that the central continent was in deep trouble. Ever since the Demon Tide had arrived in the Magus world, There had been more than 100 invasions reported from the central continent every day. As for those who had snuck in through covert means, there were even more of them. The arrival of these invaders had brought unimaginable chaos to the central continent. Most of them had mistakenly entered the space-time vortex and were randomly teleported to the sorcerer's world. There were also some that had crossed thousands of miles of the endless void, taking advantage of the opening of the sorcerer's world's portal to barge in, preparing to plunder and slaughter without restraint. The former were many, but their strength was uneven. Thus, most of them were stowaways in the Magus world, ready to escape to other planes at any time. Most of these fellows had average strength and did not have much of a background, so it was not difficult to deal with them. Basically, all of them were killed. The latter, on the other hand, were much more difficult to deal with. After all, they had come prepared. They were either more familiar with the environment of the Magus world, or they had the support of powerful forces. Either way, it was not a good thing for the rulers of the plane. Currently, there were 7 large-scale deaths on Grimm's desk, spread across 6 regions. Behind each incident was the fall and destruction of a human settlement. Molten City's mysterious death's frowny face, a large number of mortals have died in the Scoties region today. It happened in the east of the region, 300 miles away from Molten City. In a place called Marstown, 416 mortals died in a single night. According to preliminary investigations, the corpses of the dead are all present. Clothes, belongings, and other items are all present. The dead are scattered all over the town, and it seems that they died at the same time due to some unknown reason. All the dead were smiling, and their muscles were stiff. After preliminary autopsies, there are no traces of extraordinary power found on the corpses. The time of death was 3 days after the demon tide. The deaths are currently being investigated by Molten City's Rank 2 Magus, Freena. Clark's Treasure Well's mysterious disappearance. Clark Alchemy College in the Ankara region has suddenly experienced an abnormal change. As the main trial site of the college, the Treasure Well is shrouded in a mysterious white fog. Currently, we have lost contact with the 11 apprentice alchemists in the Treasure Well. Even an official Magus of the Academy went to investigate, but he was nowhere to be found. This incident happened on the 3rd day of the Mana Tide. Currently, the Intim family's Grade 2 wizard, Woodwhisker, is investigating plague incident in Intona's city. On the 7th day after the demon tide broke out, a mysterious plague suddenly broke out in the city of Intonas in the Alathia region. The first outbreak of the plague infected nearly 1/3 of the city's population. The estimated number of infected people is 21,000. After the outbreak of the plague, it began to spread at an extremely fast speed to the surrounding areas. At present, it has already infected 3 surrounding villages, and the scale of the epidemic is still continuing to expand. This area is jointly managed by Quirin's Hut, Death Knell Academy, and Molenspire. They've all sent out Magi to form a joint investigation team to investigate and control the plague. From information we've obtained, traces of forbidden magic have been found in the plague. The investigation team is urgently pursuing the Magi who broke the law, and there are currently no signs of invaders from another world. Grimm flipped through the report on his desk, his brows furrowed. In the past, he only needed to manage the affairs of the Crimson family. With Meryl and Amelia's help, he didn't feel that the family's affairs were that complicated and difficult. Now, as the entire central continent gradually fell into his hands, there were 31 regions of varying sizes, 37. 51 million square kilometers of land, and thousands of sorcerer families. These were all areas that he had to understand and control. The complicated affairs that were as vast as the mountains and seas drowned his desk like an avalanche. It had to be known that Meryl and Amelia had filtered out most of the less urgent matters for him. Those that were sent to his desk either involve a rank 4 magus or a rank 4 organization, or had hidden secrets that required him, the head of the family, to make a decision. No matter which one it was enough to give him a headache for 3 days. Over the past few days, the ordinary family affairs had all been blocked off. The fact that these 7 matters that had a greater impact were sent to him meant that they were closely related to the demon wave that had erupted. Behind many seemingly insignificant incidents, it was highly possible that some powerful and cunning creature from another plane had snuck into the central part of the continent and was stirring up trouble there, carrying out some kind of terrifying ritual or crazy massacre. Grimm wasn't too worried about those fellows who went on a killing spree. These fellows only wanted to eat to their heart's content and would naturally leave once they were full. Grimm's attitude towards them was to expel them. After all, there were too many demons from other planes, and it was impossible to kill them all. He would find them, expel them, and then seal the cracks they had entered. This was the best outcome that Grimm could think of. What really gave Grimm headaches were the other kinds of cunning fellows. They wouldn't go on a killing spree just for a moment of pleasure and attract the attention of the Magi. Like chameleons, they would sneak into the Magus world and use some sort of method to hide their traces. They would then disguise themselves and blend into the local nobles. For the sake of some unspeakable plan, they would often hide for decades, using their own special methods to invade and hollow out the local human society bit by bit. When their deeds were exposed, it would often lead to the extinction of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. The Spore Men invasion, the Snakeskin invasion, the Undead invasion recorded in the Sorcerer's Handbook. Each and every one of these terrible incidents had traces of the involvement of some powerful organization from other planes. After all, the Magus world was a well-known large plane, and the quality of the human souls here was much higher than those from small to medium-sized planes. Hence, many demons and monsters from other planes would abduct the souls of creatures from the main planes as their noble cause. They would abduct the souls of creatures from the main planes and bring them to their own planes, which would undoubtedly strengthen the plane's power and allow them to obtain more feedback from the plane. This was also a method for a plane world to strengthen itself. If the central continent didn't belong to Grimm, he wouldn't care about it anymore. But now he had just ruled over the entire central continent in name. If he allowed the demons from other planes to plunder souls in his territory, it would undoubtedly damage his image. Hence, Grimm asked Merrill and the rest to report all the mysterious incidents that had happened after the demon wave broke out. He then entered them into the AI CHIPS database and compared them with other sources of information to find the most suspicious incidents. With a target in mind, Grimm would personally send people to urge the locals to find the culprit behind the mysterious incidents as soon as possible. He would then dig out these hidden parasites from their nests one by one. However, to be able to sneak into the Magus world and conceal themselves without anyone noticing, they definitely had the strength of at least a grade 3 Magus. Hence, when it came to the final showdown, none of the old fellows in the central continent would sit still and do nothing. They had to make the best use of their resources and contribute some of their strength. Currently, the thing that worried Grimm the most was the space crack in the Alden family's territory. Since the demon wave broke out, nearly 100 grade 2 magical beasts, monsters, and demons had escaped from the space crack. There were even 3 grade 4 magical beasts. Of course, they were all killed on the spot by the Wizard's Pagoda and the War Wizard's Pagoda. However, from the images transmitted from the scene, the number and quality of the magical beasts that had entered the plane were on the rise. Once high-level calamity beasts or powerful astral beasts entered the plane, even with top-notch wizards like Mary or Monash around, it was inevitable that some of them would escape. If they managed to break through the first obstacle and escaped into the plane, it would be extremely difficult to hunt them down again. After all, without the support of the Wizard Tower and the support of spells, human wizards would be sending themselves into the tiger's den if they wanted to fight against the magical beasts of other planes with thick skin, long bloodlines, and shocking recovery abilities. Even a super wizard like Grimm had a headache thinking about the dangers involved. The eruption of the demon wave also indirectly tested the strength of the various wizard families. Take the Alobes and Hayworth regions controlled by the Crimson family as an example. Up until now, there had not been a single case of a magical beast harming the local people. In the past 10 years, the Crimson family had sent countless magi and acolytes to every corner of the 2 regions. They sealed up all the weak points in space and set up the corresponding alarm spell formations. Although the demon wave had caused all the space cracks to open automatically, breaking through most of the space seals, the overall situation was still under the Crimson family's control. As soon as something happened to the alarm spell formation, the nearest floating warship would rush over without hesitation. The Witches of Destiny on the ship would be responsible for finding traces of the enemy. The battle wizards of the family and a magic squad would be responsible for eliminating the invaders, and the wizards of the academy would be responsible for sealing the space cracks again. With the close cooperation of the various power systems, no invaders could escape the Crimson family's pursuit and escape to human society. Hence, the human countries in these two regions still maintained peace and stability, becoming the safest, most prosperous, and most lively places in the central part of the continent. It cannot be helped. Other regions and other countries could not do this. The human nobles did not have any loyalty. In order to continue the family and preserve their bloodline and inheritance, even in the farthest regions in the central part of the continent, the local rulers would spend a large amount of money to send their direct descendants to the Horton Witchcraft Academy in the Crimson Realm to study. In this way, not only could they increase their strength, but they could also avoid unknown risks. Chapter 1365. Just as the great clans were in a terrible state because of the other world's invasion and were running for their lives, an even more worrying matter appeared. According to the feedback from various monitoring points, the magical creatures in the depths of the Dark Forest were gathering and gathering quickly, and there was a tendency for them to rush out of the Dark Forest in the short term. Furthermore, this was not a single action by a single lord of the Dark Forest. It seemed like the entire Dark Forest was spontaneously rioting. During the magic tide, the magical energy that surged into the plane carried a chaotic and tyrannical aura, causing the magical creatures to become abnormally violent. It could be imagined that when such terrifying magical creatures gathered together, there would be an even larger group of beasts. Once they rushed out of the Dark Forest, the impact on human society would be huge. If they did not deal with it properly, the foundations of the mega-civilization would be shaken. Furthermore, the beast rioting was not an isolated incident in one or two regions, but the entire Dark Forest of the Magus world. In the past tens of thousands of years, the Magi had suppressed and killed the lords and kings of the Dark Forest as they pleased. Now, with the demon wave adding fuel to the fire, it was time for the demon lord to take their revenge and regain control of the plane. It had to be said that the Magi had been too lazy all these years. It had been a long time since they had cleared out the high-ranked magical creatures in the depths of the Dark Forest. Hence, outside of their perception, a new batch of lords of the Dark Forest had grown up, eager to advance to become the kings of the Dark Forest. If the lords of the Dark Forest wanted to advance to kings, launching a counterattack against the Magi was the most direct and easiest way for them to succeed. Among their targets, the Magus Association was too powerful, and they dared not touch them. The Silver Alliance's puppet army was too tyrannical, and they could not touch them. Although the Northern Witches were slightly weaker, they were unusually united against external enemies, and were not easy to deal with. Hence, the Central Continent, which was like a plate of loose sand, became the only target for the lords of the Dark Forest to sharpen their claws and teeth. Although the three major Magus organizations had also erupted with a considerable amount of beasts, it paled in comparison to the Central Continent by a few orders of magnitude. Based on the information obtained from some Magus families who had risked their lives to investigate, the scale of the demon tide in the Dark Forest this time was greater than in the past, and the number of lords of the Dark Forest that had gathered was also very shocking. Once they gathered enough numbers and charged out of the Dark Forest, the impact on the human society in the central part of the continent would be devastating. The appearance of such a relationship immediately attracted the attention of all the sorcerer families, causing them to panic even more. Blocking the beast tide was not as easy as blocking the otherworldly invaders. There were only so many gaps in the dimensional barrier. As long as they blocked the entrances and exits, they would kill anyone who tried to barge in. Although the work was arduous, the results were very effective. To put it bluntly, the central continent was completely surrounded by the dark forest. Trying to determine the direction of the beast tide's attack was simply a fool's dream. Of course, wizards could also use astrologers and prophets to observe the movements of the monsters. But after fighting against the wizards for a long time, the monsters had developed their own unique concealment and confusion methods. It was said that the Dark Forest demon lords had specially cultivated a raven emperor with prophetic abilities to suppress the wizard's prophecy and astrology. Hence, since the Magi could not detect the movements of the demon lords in advance, it would be even more difficult to kill them once they gathered. Since they could not eliminate the beast tide in advance, the central continent could only passively wait for the moment the beast tide charged out of the dark forest. All of the central regions, especially those that bordered the dark forest, were even more uneasy and panic-stricken. The regions with rank 4 organizations were better off. At least there was a powerhouse watching over them, so they could still feel at ease. As for the regions without rank 4 organizations, they could only try their best to shrink their defenses and protect the core regions of their clans. As a result, the human kingdoms and the regions they had abandoned were filled with panicked refugees. No one was willing to stay there and wait to be devoured by the beast tide. Commoners all fled their homes with their families, flocking to the safer inland regions. For a time, the people of the central continent were in a state of panic. The blazing flame monarch, naked, Grim was soaking in a huge wooden barrel that was even taller than him. The barrel was filled with a pungent blue liquid that reeked of a foul smell. There was no need for flames to heat it up. Grim himself was a human furnace. His body was dark red and full of luster. Through his translucent skin, one could vaguely see the scarlet blood flowing slowly. Although it was called blood, it was no different from boiling magma. Under the burning of his domain of combustion, the blue liquid in the barrel gradually boiled as the temperature rose. The sticky blue liquid was like a liquid monster that roared and vibrated. From time to time, transparent bubbles would appear. Grim's entire body was soaked in the blue liquid. His pores opened and closed, absorbing the strange medicinal essence that was evaporating from the blue liquid. At the same time, he released the energy, toxins, and life decline that had accumulated in his body. After soaking for a full 5 hours, the blue liquid had completely turned black. Only then did Grim crawl out with great difficulty. However, what was surprising was that after crawling out of the sticky liquid, Grim's smooth, dark red skin that was as tough as black jade was not tainted by the slightest bit of water or filth. When he stood silently in the room, a strange and powerful male body that was full of demonic charm was revealed without a doubt. AI chip self-check. Beep. Mission accepted. Initiating self-check. With a soft mechanical sound, a waterfall of information flowed down from the top of his retina. It piled up under his vision, forming a 3-dimensional model of a human body. On the side of the model, Grim's current body information was listed. Grim, male. Rank 4.5 Magus of Laws, Fire Specialization. Astral Beast Bloodline, 97%. Chaotic Physique, Extraordinary Magic Resistance. Heart of Laws, Law of Fire, 89%. Stats, Strength, 21 Vitality, 15 plus 2. Agility, Spirit, 46 plus 5. Bloodline Talents, Energy Black Hole. Law of Fire, Inextinguishable Flames. Looking at the stats, Grim could not help but shake his head and sigh. Compared to before, his strength had dropped by 6 points, vitality by 16 points, and agility by 3 points. He had won the battle at Crushed Stone Canyon, defeating the Golden Clan's leader, Monash, Gaia, and the Association's super expert, Savorius, but that battle was ultimately a Pyrrhic victory. The heavy losses had greatly reduced his vitality, and even his strength and agility had fallen. However, there were gains and losses. The consecutive battles had increased Grim's spiritual force by 2 points, going from 44 to 46. Although it was only a difference of 2 points, he had benefited greatly. His mental state was unprecedentedly good. He had now officially reached high grade 4. He had risen by a small rank and was one step closer to his peak. Under the dual amplification of the Divine Fire Pearl and the Book of Darkness, any increase in his physical strength would be reflected in his combat strength, which would increase by several times or even dozens of times. With the tempering of these battles, he had vaguely understood the direction of his future development. The analysis of the astral beast bloodline had reached 97%. He was only one step away from possessing a unique bloodline transformation ability. The chaotic physique was only an external characteristic of the astral beast bloodline, and it was not considered an ability. The reason he could unlock the astral beast bloodline to its current state was because of the fish-shaped astral beast that Mary had sent back a few days ago. Every day, Grimm would soak himself in the astral beast blood and a special medicinal liquid, using the body-tempering sorcerer's medicine to temper his body. As expected, his vitality had recovered by 1 point. The greatest effect was the comprehension and integration of this body with the astral beast bloodline. In the past, Grimm had always relied on fire spells in battle, and the astral beast bloodline had not been able to display its full potential. The reason for this was that he had not found the right path for his bloodline to grow. On the path of bloodlines, he was just a rookie who had just started. Although he had the astral beast bloodline, apart from the chaotic physique and the energy black hole, he did not even have the most basic characteristics of his bloodline. How could this match his current status as a high-grade 4 sorcerer? However, the astral beast corpse that Mary had sent over had allowed Grimm to find a way to strengthen his bloodline. Devour, devour, devour. The most typical characteristic of the astral beast was to continuously devour high-grade life forms. Intelligent life forms, large amounts of souls, and the origin of planes, these things were the source of the astral beast's growth and evolution, as well as the source of their strength. Since Grimm had chosen the astral beast bloodline for himself, he could only follow the ancient growth method of the astral beast to develop and strengthen his bloodline. However, as an intelligent life form with principles and a bottom line, devouring other intelligent life forms would undoubtedly cast a shadow over Grimm's heart. Hence, he did not hesitate to devour other astral beasts. The astral beasts all had strange appearances, and they were monsters among monsters. Grimm did not feel any psychological burden devouring them. Of course, what Grimm really devoured was not the flesh of the astral beasts, but the unique genes in their bodies. Using the powerful functions of the AI chip, Grimm could extract gene fragments that were beneficial to him from different astral beasts and then fuse them into his body using genetic jigsaw puzzles. However, in his current state, perhaps only the astral beasts of grade 4 or above could bring him benefits. None of these fellows were good, and in the outside world, they would be terrifying demons that could easily slaughter an entire plane. Chapter 1366. However, after his self-examination, Grimm realized that his greatest growth came from his fire spells. Following his analysis of the Heart of Laws, Grimm had started to fuse many different laws of fire together, forming his own style of laws of fire, the inextinguishable flames. It was so terrifying that even powerful beings had to be wary of it. The only thing Grimm needed to do now was to follow the tempering method that the Flame's sovereign king had given him. He had to slowly refine the flames in his body into flames of laws, and then use them to slowly transform his body. Once his body was completely compatible with the unique laws of fire like the inextinguishable flames, Grimm would have completed the transformation of his body of laws and could now prepare to advance to rank 5. Before this, he had only been a half-step magus of laws. The AI chip estimated that it would take him 218 years to transform his body of laws. All he had to do now was slowly accumulate the power of laws of fire and raise his spiritual force. The moment he reached the peak of rank 4 in these two aspects, Grimm would successfully advance to rank 5. After completing today's medicinal bath, Grim once again put on the soft armor made from the hide of a fire dragon. Although he could use spells to create all sorts of simple clothing after becoming a rank 4 magus, it was impossible for items made from energy to have the strange properties of magic artifacts. The internal structure and rune system of magic artifacts were too complicated, and he could not replicate them with his current knowledge and strength. Hence, he treasured the hide of a fire dragon, which had such powerful defensive properties. After putting on his clothes, Grim took a step forward, and his entire body disappeared into the flames that soared into the sky. In the corner of another secret chamber, a flame suddenly appeared, and Grim stepped out of it. There was a small pool in the corner of the room, filled with dazzling, strange waves of light. The pool was 7 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 3 meters tall. It was filled with a strange liquid filled with a dense aura of light elemental energy. The liquid also contained an indescribable aura of life. If Grim did not explain, perhaps no one would be able to associate this strange liquid with human blood. But it was indeed blood. That's right. Even Grim did not expect that after analyzing a drop of the light wizard Jaredin's origin blood, he had used a large amount of rare resources and analyzed genetic information to replicate the blood. Standing at the edge of the pond, one could feel that the liquid light in the pond was clear and pure. As the water rippled, all kinds of mysterious lights entered his eyes. Even Grim couldn't help but be moved, and his mind became a little blurred. As if sensing Grim's gaze, the liquid of light vibrated, and a humanoid figure slowly rose from the center of the pool. Then, the light and shadow changed, and a transparent human figure that looked exactly the same as Grim's figure appeared. Main body, what are you going to do with me? You can't imprison me like this forever, right? Life is free. Although you gave me my life, I still want to pursue freedom. The transparent figure said indifferently. Even his voice was exactly the same as Grim's. Grim furrowed his brows. Speaking of which, he could not believe that the blood of the light wizard Jaredin, which he had spent such a huge price to replicate, still maintained a strange mental connection with his main body. Although Jaredin, who was far away in the eastern part of the continent, could not sense that a clone had suddenly appeared due to the isolation of the wizard's pagoda, the transparent figure in front of him did indeed have some of the power of the Apostle of Light. The transparent figure in front of him had blood filled with dense light element, and it had a law of light similar to Jaredin's. The only difference between it and Jaredin was that Jaredin had hundreds of years of memories and emotions, while the former was just a pure soul formed with a portion of Grim's mental energy as its core. Other than that, there was almost no difference between the two. Furthermore, as long as he let it out of the pagoda, Jaredin would be able to sense the abnormality even if he was at the end of the world. At that time, if Jaredin chased after him, it would be difficult for Grim to explain everything to him. Thus, before he figured out how to use this strange figure of light, Grim did not plan to let it out to attract trouble. If I let you go, what will you do? Grim could not help but ask curiously. I'll go find that Jaredin and fight him. If he wins, he'll fuse with me. If I win, I'll fuse with him. After all, there can only be one Apostle of Light in this world, and it's either him or me. The transparent figure of light only had basic intelligence, and had not learned the complex and cunning ability of humans to lie. On the other hand, his strength was only at the initial grade 4, one rank lower than Gerard. It's impossible for you to defeat him. Grim shook his head. He has a real body, and as long as his life does not end, he can continuously produce light energy, but you can't. If you leave this pool of light liquid, you'll lose the ability to produce light energy, and your power will only decrease as you fight, until you're completely exhausted. Saying this, Grim could not help but sigh again. It's impossible for you to defeat him. After all, you're not a real life form. Then how can I become a real life form? The transparent figure of light asked curiously. First, you need to have a core that can hold your spiritual will and the origin of your soul. Next, You need to build yourself a body that is compatible with the origin of light. Grimm did not hide anything from this figure of light, and was sincerely helping it plan. After all, the figure of light had a strand of his spiritual force as its core. As long as he willed it, the other party's consciousness would dissipate, and its intelligence would be destroyed. Hence, there is no need to worry about it suddenly turning against him. If he could really solve some problems, Grimm would immediately have another trustworthy helper at the rank 4 level. Don't worry, I'll try my best to gather some materials that are compatible with the light elemental essence, and help you build a real body. When that time comes, you'll be able to move around freely. Maybe you'll even find a chance to seize Jaredon's power. Grimm consoled. I understand. Thank you, main body. Remember to wake me up the next time you have something. The transparent figure of light nodded, and its body dissipated into liquid light. It fell back into the pool and disappeared without a trace. After leaving the pool of liquid light, Grimm arrived at an alchemy workshop in another corner of the secret room. On a strange platform, the 4-meter-tall, pitch-black body of the shadow fiend lay flat on it. Countless rays of alchemy light were engraved on the surface of its shadow steel body, which was covered in complicated and detailed runes and magic patterns. In the previous battle at Nightmare Castle, the Shadow Fiend had suffered greatly at the hands of Gria, and its entire body had been smashed into pieces countless times. Although the Shadow Fiend had the ability to breathe darkness and could heal itself in the shadow space, such a serious injury had caused its basic battle strength to drop significantly. Hence, Grimm had made some modifications to the Shadow Fiend's body, enhancing its ability to conceal itself and break through defenses. At the very least, after the modifications, the Shadow Fiend would not be like before, where it could not even pose a threat or pressure to powerful beings. According to the AI chip's calculations, the Shadow Fiend's rank would jump from mid-rank 4 to high-rank 4, and its lethality against elemental magi would increase by several folds. With such strength, it would not be a problem for it to crush an elementary rank 4 Magus. Grimm waited silently for the Shadow Fiend's new magic patterns to be completed, and it floated on the experiment table once more. With a wave of his hand, the Shadow Fiend disappeared into the shadows like a ghost. Grimm kept the Shadow Fiend, and just as he turned to leave the secret spell room, a message was transmitted to his mind. Astral Spirit Taraz? Why is it looking for me? Filled with curiosity, Grimm returned to his residence. He took out a blue crystal the size of a fingernail from a hidden cupboard by the wall and placed it on the communication crystal on the desk. Strands of strange energy flowed out from the blue crystal, and the communication crystal suddenly became bright and clear. Soon, when the light and shadow gradually stabilized, Taraz's strange cloud-like body and the starry bone nodes that covered it slowly appeared. Long time no see, Grimm. It has indeed been a long time. Why did you suddenly think of contacting me? Grimm's tone did not contain the joy of reuniting with an old friend. These people were only temporary allies, and there was no such thing as trust or friendship between them. He had to be careful with every word Taraz said, in case he fell victim to some trap or conspiracy. However, as a rank 4 Magus on the same side, it was better to have more ways to go than to be alone without anyone to rely on. Hence, after the mission to obtain the austere Winter's chest, Grimm had contacted this astral spirit about the interplanar trade, and the two of them had indeed crossed paths. However, after 100 years, the astral spirit had suddenly contacted him, and it did not seem like they wanted to exchange resources. Hence, Grimm asked directly, "Old friend, the mana tide has erupted. How's the situation over there?" Taurus stared at Grimm with 2 balls of white light in his eye sockets. Obviously, he cared a lot about Grimm's answer. "It's all right. It's a little bad, but it hasn't worsened to the worst-case scenario." Grimm gave a vague answer, obviously not going to tell Taraz about the Magus world's actual situation. Of course, your Magus world is one of the few advanced civilizations in the multiverse, and you have a great rank 9 Magus backing you up. The Manatide's early eruption won't be able to harm your foundations. Taraz sighed. Our astral realm isn't the same. There are stragglers everywhere, and while their individual strength isn't weak, it's difficult to unite them to defend against the invaders. Oh, there's already an invasion. Grim could not help but be curious. It's the astral beast Hesmodo. That bastard barged into our astral realm and forcefully laid a stone-hard egg here. We're now searching everywhere for the embryo. At this point, even Taraz, who is usually calm and steady, could not help but curse out loud. Hearing the words stone-hard egg, even Grim could not help but shudder. Chapter 1367. The astral beast Hethmodo and the stone-hard egg were not good things. Hethmodo was notorious throughout the multiverse. Its true form was a terrifying astral beast that was as high as grade 6. What made it different from other astral beasts was that Hethmodo rarely intruded into a plane to forcibly seize the plane's origin. What it did was even more despicable, which was to rape the plane's will and give birth to the stone-hard egg, which it parasitized on the plane's origin. This way, the stone-hard egg could use the power of the plane's origin to grow bit by bit. Although the stone-hard egg was just a mutant egg, it had a more troublesome aspect. It possessed the law of Earth, which allowed it to travel and move at will underground to avoid being tracked and hunted by the natives of the plane. By the time the astral beast hatched, it would usually be a grade 4 ferocious beast. Using this method, Hethmodo could breed a large number of descendants for itself. Material planes that were targeted by it would suffer great damage to their origin and will. In serious cases, the plane's level might even drop. Fortunately, the hatching of the stone-hard egg required time. It would take about 10 years for a stone-hard egg to hatch. As long as the natives could find the stone-hard egg wandering underground and kill it within 10 years, the loss of the plane's origin would be recovered. Of course, if Grim could go to the spirit realm to capture the stone-hard egg and bring it back to the sorcerer world for blood sacrifice, he would definitely receive the highest reward from the sorcerer world's plane's will. Unfortunately, this was a good idea, but it was impossible to achieve. This was because astral spirit Turaz would never invite him to hunt for the stone-hard egg. Instead, he wanted to use Grim's relationship to contact Alice. If it was not necessary, the natives of the spirit realm would not rely on any external help to hunt for the stone-hard egg. After all, they were also worried that the stone-hard egg would be taken away by someone from another plane, which would cause damage to the plane's origin. However, the stone-hard egg was simply too cunning. It wandered around in the underground space, not giving the natives a chance to catch it. Thus, Astral Soul Taraz could only think of a way to seek help from a destiny, which like Alice, and borrow her power to locate the stone-hard egg. As for the prophets and prophets of the Spiriters plane, their powers of prophecy came from the plane's consciousness. Now, even the plane consciousness of the spirit realm has been destroyed. Since she had been raped, there was nothing they could do. After introducing Taurus to Alice, Grim let go of the matter. It was currently the period of the demon wave, and all the planes were in a complete mess. Perhaps all the powerhouses of the planes would have to retreat to the source plane, and only after they were sure that it was safe would they be able to go out and fight. That was why, 10 years before the Great Demon Wave broke out, the planar expeditions, which were still in progress, would be paused in order to stabilize the rear. During this period, other than the calamity creatures and star beasts that would come out to stir up trouble, the other advanced civilizations would lay low and observe the changes in the situation. For a time, all the major planes were in a rare period of peace. However, with Grim's current identity and status, he obviously could not stay idle for long. Soon, a top-secret intelligence report was placed on his desk. Grim was in big trouble. There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world. Grim had plotted against the son of the god of wisdom, Jello, and stolen the famous book of wisdom from him. This matter had been covered up tightly by him, and it was only after the book of wisdom had been devoured and transformed into the book of darkness that he revealed it to others. But even so, the god of wisdom, Jiro, used some unknown method to find Grimm in the end. According to some secret sources, the god of wisdom, Jello, had already viewed Grimm as his #1 enemy. In the world of gods, he had already issued a huge bounty. Anyone who offered Grimm's head as a sacrifice would receive a tailor-made grade 4 divine weapon from Jello, as well as 3 years of free study in his Hall of Wisdom, as well as the friendship of all the believers of the God of Wisdom. Truth be told, even Grimm had the urge to cut off his own head when he heard such a generous bounty. Fortunately, the God of Wisdom, Jello, was only a grade 5 god, and one that did not specialize in combat. Hence, with his main body not daring to step out of his divine kingdom, it was difficult for him to threaten Grimm with just his authority and followers. As for whether he dared to send out a grade 4 clone, there was no need to even think about it. With so many predators and peak powerhouses in the multiverse, if a mere grade 4 clone dared to show itself, it would definitely be hunted down and killed. At that time, let alone finding trouble with Grimm, Jello's clone might not even be able to protect itself. There were so many divine weapons in the Magus world, and most of them were not created by the Magi themselves. Instead, they were plundered from the world of gods. One of the main reasons for this was that the races of the Magus world were very similar, and both had humans as their origins. Hence, there were many similarities in knowledge, strength, and techniques. The divine weapons that Magi plundered only needed to be slightly modified before they could be used, so they naturally did not get tired of it. Of course, another important reason was that the gods of the world of gods liked to bestow divine weapons to their followers and followers as proof of their status and glory. Their followers and followers were naturally incomparable to the gods, so it was 100 times easier to plunder and kill them. It was because of these two reasons that many high-ranked Magi liked to plunder and steal the divine weapons or substandard divine weapons from high-ranked believers of the world of gods to quickly increase their own battle prowess. The end result of this was that the world of gods and the Magus civilization became two irreconcilable opposing factions. As long as the believers of the world of gods and the Magi met in the outer realms, war would break out without a second word. However, those who could be listed on the World of Gods bounty list were mostly great Magi, and a grade 4 Magus like Grimm was extremely rare. Hence, to Grimm, this sort of bounty was more like a way to spread his name in the outer realms than to create trouble for him. At this moment, many camps in the outer realms had probably heard of Grimm's name. However, just as Grimm was scoffing at this, another piece of news arrived that made his scalp go numb. A second god from the world of gods had placed a bounty on Grimm, and this one was a grade 7 god. The god of fire, Renai. The divine fire orb in Grimm's hands was the work of the god of fire. This veteran god of the world of gods had somehow found out that it was the dark witch of the Magus world who had intruded into his secondary plane, killed his loyal believers, and stolen the divine fire orb. Hence, in a fit of rage, he had placed a bounty on both the Dark Witch and Grimm. The bounty was as tempting as ever, but Grimm was no longer in the mood to find joy in his misery. He could ignore the threat of the God of Wisdom. As long as he didn't leave the Magus world and intrude into the God of Wisdom's territory, the threat he posed to him was practically non-existent. However, the grade 7 God of Fire was different. Rank 7, even the world of gods. This was a famous and influential figure. If he wanted to kill Grimm wholeheartedly, Grimm would have to be careful when he went out in the future. If he was caught by her, she could send out a high-rank clone, and Grimm's chances of escaping back to the Magus world would be less than 30%. On top of that, the God of Fire was a god of war. Even an insignificant grade 4 flame doppelganger would pose a grave threat to Grimm's life if it charged into the plane. Every time he thought of this, Grimm felt his scalp go numb and his hair stand on end. This was the first time he felt an endless chill in his heart. However, he did not regret it. After all, without the help of these two divine weapons, his strength would only be at the middle of grade 4. He could only endure the suppression of many veteran Magi and slowly hone his strength. Now, even Monash, who who had the bloodline of the Golden Titans, had to bow down to him. Even Gaia had to bow down before him. The entire central continent was now nominally in his hands. How did such a miracle happen? Naturally, it was because of the two powerful Grade 5 divine weapons. With them, Grimm would be able to surpass the limits of his rank and completely suppress the other experts. Without them, Grimm would not be able to gain such a huge advantage in terms of seniority or in a head-on confrontation. Hence, no matter how great the challenges and difficulties he faced, Grimm would not give up on these two treasures that were of great significance to him. However, this meant that he had to pay attention to his own safety. Being targeted by two gods from another world at the same time was a terrifying pressure that normal people could not understand. He was undoubtedly safe in the Magus world and the foreign camps. No matter how domineering those two gods were, they would not go to these places to cause trouble for him. However, if Grimm wanted to go to other planes in the future, he would have to pay attention to hiding his tracks. If he was targeted and chased around the world, the consequences would be unimaginable. Hence, he could only live in seclusion for now, trying his best not to give them the chance to kill him. Also, if he could improve his strength to the next level, he would be more confident in dealing with his enemies. In the past, Grimm would not have dared to boast like this. At Grade 4, every step forward was extremely difficult. Every point of increase in attributes required a large investment of resources. However, Grimm was different from the rest. He had a chance to improve in the short term. That was the astral beast bloodline that he had cultivated for over 100 years. His analysis of the astral beast bloodline was at 97%, and he was only a step away from success. Once he succeeded, he would immediately gain his own bloodline transformation ability. Chapter 1368. Darking Valley. As the scariest weak point in space in the eastern part of the continent, this was a forbidden land for life. Looking down from the sky, the black ink valley looked like a huge wound engraved on the black soil. It was slightly wide in the middle and slender on both ends. It stretched for nearly 100 miles, and no green could be seen in the surrounding 10 miles. Even in broad daylight, the depths of the dark ink valley's narrow rift valley would emit wisps of black fog, covering the area below tightly, making it difficult for people to see what was going on. According to the internal records of the Wizard Association, this dark ink valley was really created by a sword and not naturally formed. It was a scar left behind by a sword strike from the great wizards of ancient times during a battle. As the power of this sword was too strong, the power of the rules it contained continued to this day. Even with the wizard world's self-recovery abilities, it had not been able to repair the damaged laws of the plane even after so many years. Thus, this dark ink valley became a place where the laws of the plane were extremely chaotic. At this moment, on both sides of the narrow rift valley, the war wizard pagodas stood in great numbers. One could see the strange scene of the wizard's pagodas piercing through the fog and illuminating a certain area. In the sky above the rift valley, there was a large number of wizard eyes slowly roaming around, constantly monitoring the changes below. The so-called dark ink valley was not on the surface, but in the depths of the rift valley 10,000 meters below. That was where the chains of the laws of the plane were broken. The strange wizard power had caused the laws of the area to become chaotic, the space to become chaotic, and the flow of time was a complete mess. The space-time fissure that stretched for nearly 100 miles was still in constant turmoil and changes. Every moment, there would be thousands of small but frequent space-time tremors, creating all sorts of strange space-time illusions and space-time vortexes. In the past tens of thousands of years, there had been countless wizards who came to study the changes in the space here, but every time they returned empty-handed. There were even a few who got too close to the space-time fissure that were sucked into it, never to be seen again. There had been people who had personally tried to travel downwards from the Dark Ink Valley. After charging through the space-time fissure, there was a 50% chance that they would arrive outside the wizard world's dimensional barrier. Of course, there was another 50% chance that they would be randomly teleported to a mysterious corner of the multiverse. Furthermore, every time he transmigrated, he would be teleported to a different location. There was no pattern to it. It was as if this was a space-time rift that had been destroyed by the powerful rule power of the ancient sorcerers. There was nothing strange or peculiar about it. Most of the time, the Sorcerer Association would try to seal the space-time rift beneath Ink Abyss Valley. However, this still couldn't stop some strange things from coming out of the space-time cracks from time to time. Now, with the arrival of the Mana Tide, the Magus Association's sealing spell formation was destroyed, causing the place to become lively once more. Almost every time the Great Mana Tide washed over, there would be some weird and powerful otherworld monsters or aberrations spewing out from the dimensional rift. They wandered and fought at the bottom of the Rift Valley. Every now and then, a particularly powerful monster would rush out of the valley, trying to break into the Association's territory. That would be the moment when the numerous war wizard pagodas above the Rift Valley would focus their attacks. It had only been a month since the outbreak of the Great Mana Tide, and the piles of corpses of magical creatures and aberrations at the bottom of the Rift Valley were already a dozen meters thick. The area at the exit of the Rift Valley was a mess of corpses, and the ground was covered in terrifying scars left behind by the bombardment of various elemental wizard spells. Originally, teams of the Association's wizards were responsible for patrolling the skies above the Rift Valley. However, ever since a team of wizards was lured by the gaze of a powerful magical creature in the Rift Valley, they walked into the valley in a daze and were devoured by the magical creatures. Hence, the patrolling and investigation of the area had been handed over to the Wizard Eyes. Within the War Wizard Pagoda near the Rift, the Association's wizards released many Wizard Eyes, allowing them to cover the entire valley and using them to monitor the changes in the space-time rift. Periodically, high-level wizards from the Association would lead an elite team into the depths of the valley to clear out the magical creatures that had accumulated there. This was to prevent the magical creatures from taking root in the valley and forming an even more troublesome group of magical creatures. Whenever this happened, it would be the moment when the Ink Abyss Valley turned into a battlefield of massacre. Ink Abyss, an abyss of demons soaked in black blood. A thick fog swirled and churned in front of them. The foul, turbid air was filled with a pungent, acidic smell. The stench was so strong and disgusting that an ordinary person would choke to death in no time. The originally dark ground beneath their feet was now covered by the corpses of magical creatures of all shapes and sizes. The Association's team in front of them was practically stepping on the piles of corpses as they advanced with difficulty. There were only 17 people in the team, but there were 3 level 4 wizards and 14 level 3 wizards. The quality of the members was simply shocking. Even the weakest member of the team had the strength of a level 3 wizard. In the Central Continent, he would at least be the leader of a mid-level wizard family. But here, he was just an attendant in charge of collecting resources from the magical creatures. At the front of the team was the level 4 body refinement wizard, Henry. Following closely behind him was the level 4 elemental wizard, Shribber. The third person was the level 4 wizard, Neve. She was the last person in charge of protecting the rear of the team. The other members of the team were all level 3 wizards. There was not even a single level 2 wizard who would be a hindrance. Moreover, the level 3 wizards in the team range from Spellmaster, Sealer, Psionic Warlock, and Enchanter. It could be said that they covered most of the wizard classes. The 3 level 4 wizards in charge of combat included the Body Refinement Wizard, the Body Refinement Wizard, Shribber, and the Blood Wizard, Neve. Any one of these wizard combat teams could take care of all the needs of the team while still maintaining a strong combat power. The Wizard Association's strength was evident from this. After the team entered the crack, they went all the way down the steep slope towards the depths of the valley. Both sides of the path were lined with strange greenish-brown steel rocks, which were engraved with dense and complicated defensive spell formations. This was to prevent some strange magical creatures from burrowing into the ground or the rock walls and escaping from the Ink Abyss Valley. Along the way, it could be seen that there were quite a number of magical creatures burrowing out of the ground. Even the seemingly indestructible rock walls on both sides had terrifying claw marks that were half a meter deep. In the team, the lowest-ranked wizard was a female wizard. She wore a tight, white leather armor, tied her hair into a ponytail, and wore leather boots. In her hand was a strange crystal rod that was half a meter long. The end of the rod was constantly flashing with strange blue, green, red, and purple lights. Suddenly, she pointed the crystal rod at a pile of corpses on the side of the road. The end of the crystal rod immediately flashed with a strange, dark purple light. "My lady, there is a flame lizard's corpse," the white-armored wizard hurriedly whispered. Flame lizard. The second wizard, Shribber, could not help but stop in his tracks. He turned his head and said, "I want its heart. As for the other parts, you can collect them according to the situation. Raven, Jarl, you two protect her." "Yes, yes." The male and female wizards bowed at the same time, protecting the white-armored wizard as they walked towards the pile of corpses. The other members of the team scattered around the area, resting quietly while waiting for the organs to be harvested. Although the Ink Abyss Valley brought a lot of trouble to the Wizard Association, it also brought some additional benefits. There were all sorts of strange magical beasts and resources that came from all directions. Many of these magical creatures had never existed in the wizarding world before. Their magic organs and core components were of great research value to high-grade wizards. Hence, it was only natural for him to make a trip down here and harvest some magical beast resources. However, as they were quietly waiting, Wizard Henry suddenly frowned and stood in the middle of the narrow and long valley. His eyes flashed as he stared at the terrifying rolling fog below. The other members of the team were also experienced in battle. Through other means, or with their keen senses, they also noticed the abnormality below. They stood in position and began to prepare for battle. The fire wizard, Shribber, stood in the middle of the team. His hands grasped the air, and flames began to quickly gather in his palms. In the depths of his eyes, the two blazing flames became even more eye-catching. The vibration of the earth became more and more obvious. Suddenly, the thick fog parted, and a behemoth with a height of 10 meters rushed out from the bottom of the valley. Its body was strong and flexible, and it slammed into Henry. "Be careful. It's a corpse hound." The sharp-eyed fire wizard, Shribber, recognized the identity of this gigantic creature with a single glance. The corpse hound was a kind of dog-type undead creature created by fanatical necromancers, or the god of death. If one looked closely, they would find that their bodies were all pieced together by countless rotten human corpses. Because the methods used in the production process are extremely cruel and horrible, although these human corpses have been dead for a long time, they still continue to let out terrible screams and murmurs, causing everyone who sees and hears them to tremble in fear. Meanwhile, the skeletal hound the wizard party had encountered was an extremely powerful tier 4 undead creature. Moreover, it possessed an aura of fear. As soon as it rushed out of the fog, the corpse hound didn't hesitate to ram into Henry. Henry's eyes suddenly became fierce. His whole right arm silently swelled several times, and his palm also became as huge as a palm leaf fan. Suddenly, Henry shouted. Henry stepped on the ground and stretched his right arm forward, unexpectedly withstanding the impact of the rank 4 corpse hound without retreating an inch. When the corpse hound was pushed back by Henry, Shribber, who was already ready for battle, waved his hands, and several violent fireballs bombarded the ugly and hideous body of the corpse hound. Chapter 1369. With its undead body and aura of fear, a Tier 4 basic skeleton hound was a ferocious monster that could wreak havoc on any plane of existence. However, in the face of the elite battle teams sent by the Wizard Association, they were defeated in just 3 moves, and the ground was covered in bloodstains. The pile of rotting corpses also quickly decayed, turning into a puddle of pungent black liquid that slowly seeped into the black soil. However, it also left behind a withered heart and a resentment crystal. Both of them are grade 4 materials, and they are very valuable. Looking at his subordinates, carefully collecting the spoils of the battle, Henry's face was covered with a short, black beard, but there was no joy on his face. He stared solemnly at the fog below, his expression cold and resolute. It seemed like a big guy ran out from below. Otherwise, a monster like the undead hound wouldn't have rushed out so recklessly. Schreiber, who was standing beside him, waved his fire shield and sensed the movement in the valley with a cautious look on his face. It's the smell of sulfur and fire. In my opinion, I'm afraid that some demon from the Abyss realm has come here. Who cares? As long as we meet them, we will get rid of them. I need some demon blood to experiment with. If it's only one or two, we don't have to be afraid with our strength. But if there are too many of them... Speaking of this, even Henry, who has always been arrogant and impulsive, hesitated. These demon bastards have very hard heads, and it will be very difficult to chop them off. If there are too many of them, we will retreat and let them bleed in front of the War Wizard Tower before coming out to harvest them. Don't tell me you want to die in this stinky, deep ink valley, Schreiber snappily retorted. With a smile on his face, Henry took the lead and walked into the fog. Central Continent, Space Fissure. Compared to the Moyuan Valley, the Space Fissure is a dozen times smaller, so the strength and number of monsters that snuck into the Space Fissure can't be compared to the Moyuan Valley. But correspondingly, the overall strength of the Andrews Arden family can't be compared to the Behemoth Wizard Association. Thus, in less than a month's time, the heavy pressure he had to bear had already caused him to be mentally and physically exhausted, and he was in unbearable pain. However, as the head of the Arden family, he couldn't give up. After all, this was his family's territory, and behind him were his trusted subordinates who had followed him for hundreds of years. On this territory, there were nearly 6 million subjects and countless manors, castles, and villages that belonged to the Alden family. As long as one or two monsters escaped from his place, the surrounding villages and citizens would face a calamity. Although he had tried his best to arrange all the evacuation matters in the territory before the demonic wave broke out, moving most of the people to the area protected by the Wizard Tower. However, the resulting chaos gave him a huge headache. The Great Mana Tide was not something that could pass in a day or two. According to previous experiences, the Great Mana Tide would erupt at the beginning, stabilize in the middle, and then slowly fade away at the end. The whole process would take up to 100 years. 100 years. Perhaps this was only a small part of a high-grade wizard's life. But for those mortals who had no one to rely on, it was a long lifetime. Relying on the family's past savings and reserves, they might be able to gather the subjects and protect them for a period of time. However, as time passed, even the Arden family would not be able to support them. Therefore, he only wanted to survive the first 10 years of the Great Mana Tide, and when the situation was a little more stable, he would try his best to restore the territory and the subjects to their previous normal state. However, in this plan, the Great Space Crack was always a huge, unstable factor. If one day, an extremely powerful star beast broke into the territory, and the family's arrangements here could not stop it, what would happen next? Even if one thought with one's toes, what would happen next was extremely terrifying. To be honest, the reason why the Arden family was able to firmly defend the Great Space Crack in the first month of the Great Mana Tide was not only because of the family's own power, but also because of the Crimson family's 500 Magic Machine Legion, as well as Mary and Monash. Gaia, the core strength of a normal wizard family, was the family's internal wizards. Although there were not many of them, they were the core of a family and also the foundation for the family's development and strength. In order to make up for the lack of basic combat power, most wizard families would also train some exotic beast armies or wizard troops to fight at the front lines. Essentially, they were just a group of wizard apprentices with the same combat power as wizards. It could be considered as recycling those apprentices who had no hope of advancing to the next level. However, because of the Great Mana Tide, those exotic beast armies had to return to their respective planes, where they protected the Arden family's ruling order in the secondary planes. Therefore, Andrews was left with only the wizard beast army and a small number of wizard troops to defend the Great Space Crack. Such a team might not have much of a problem in dealing with ordinary sorcerer wars, but if they were to be used to defend against star beasts or magical creatures that could cross the endless void and invade the sorcerer world, it would seem to be insufficient and dangerous. So far, only 2 star beasts had broken into the wizard world through the Great Space Crack. The rank 4 fish-shaped star beast was injured by Mary, and then it died in the hands of the Arden family's winged dragon squad. The other rank 3 star beast was personally killed by Andrews under the wizard tower. In addition, there were more than 100 monsters and monsters that came in. Among them, the lowest level was a rank 2 advanced vicious beast. In a mortal world, it would be easy to slaughter a city and destroy country. But here, it was just the most insignificant minion on the plain battlefield. However, starting from the 37th day of the Great Mana Tide, the turbulence of the Great Space Crack became more and more intense, and the creatures that came out of it were more inclined to the Abyss Demons. The small ones were only rank 1 or 2 Flame Devils, Longhorn Devils, Cerberus, Quaset Devils, Vlos Devils, and Succubi. The big ones were high-grade Demon Hunters, Hezra Devils, Glabriza Devils, Serpent Devils, and Baylor Devils. Andrews suspected that a certain great lord of the Abyss wanted to invade the wizard world and took advantage of the Great Mana Tide to open a plain passage from the Abyss realm to the Great Space Crack. That was why so many ugly and annoying Abyss demons were sent to his territory. As everyone knew, the Abyss demons were irritable, full of malice, arbitrary, violent, and had no sense of morality. No one could predict their next move. They often invaded other planes, bringing destruction and fear. They were committed to destroying everything, including their own kind, and took pleasure in doing so. They resisted order, and even the Lord of the Abyss could not make them act according to his will. Unless they were controlled by magic, they would never unite, and it was impossible for them to carry out any actions with a plan. Their previous thoughts would be overturned in the next moment. They did not care whether their plans could be completed or whether their goals could be achieved. They only cared about whether their cruel, tyrannical, and bloodthirsty nature could be satisfied. Apart from that, they did not care about anything else. In the end, the Abyss demons were just a group of evil souls or evil thoughts created by the will of the Abyss. They were ugly and evil creatures without any rationality to speak of. When other monsters roamed other planes, they would have to consider whether they could survive the battle and enjoy the feast of flesh and blood later on. But these Abyss demons did not care about that. Even if they knew that this was a battlefield of flesh and blood where death was certain, they would still rush over as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Fight, fight, and fight again until they fell into a pool of blood. Even a level 4 wizard like Andrews would have a headache if he encountered such a bloodthirsty demon. No matter how many Abyss demons there were, they could not threaten his life. However, the Wizard's Pagoda of War posed a great threat to the Arden family. After all Abyss demons were powerful evil creatures that practiced both magic and martial arts. They had black magic-resistant skin covered in magical tattoos, and their physical strength was unprecedentedly strong. They could completely withstand the violent spells of the Wizard's Pagoda of War and kill a group of wizard beasts. The demonic spells they cast could also cause visible damage to the Wizard's Pagoda of War. More terrifyingly, most of the high-level demons had the precise teleportation spell, which could instantly teleport them to any place in the battlefield. With such a special ability, the wizards could no longer use the tactic of using wizard beasts to block the enemies from afar and then use the Wizard's Pagoda of War to bombard them. If any wizard from the Arden family dared to leave the Wizard's Pagoda, he would be surrounded by a swarm of Abyss demons. No matter how powerful one was, no matter how powerful one's spells were, one would still die when faced with a team of butchers. Therefore, after the death of 2 level 3 wizards, None of the wizards from the Arden family dared to leave the wizard's pagoda. Therefore, the task of stopping the abyss demons from escaping the battlefield fell on the team of wizard beasts. In front of the massive and powerful abyss demons, the wizard beasts were like a pack of hounds facing lions and tigers. Other than barking in despair and wailing, they could not stop the abyss demons at all. Therefore, as some of the abyss demons escaped from the battlefield and entered the family's territory, the flames of war spread. In just a few days, the entire territory of the Arden family was engulfed in the flames of war. Miserable cries of human beings could be heard everywhere. Demonic creatures wreaked havoc everywhere. The human society that used to be peaceful had become the sacrificial offerings and sacrifices of this demonic tide. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.